Chapter 299. Since Tom had only learned to speak for a short time, it could not understand most of the words spoken by Kieran. Therefore, after the little Cheelin happily communicated with it a few times, it straightforwardly gave it a nickname, Tom the Big Parrot. Although Tom's soul was that of a human, its body was that of a beast after all. As a beast, it had a natural fear of Kieran. Therefore, although it had a bad temper, it did not dare to be angry with Kieran. Besides, it did not understand the language, so Tom tried not to argue with Kieran and ignored it. Kieran was very bored, but she often played with Tom for fun. In the 2 days since it came to the mansion, Kieran spent most of its time with Tom. "Little Apple, how did you know that I was taking a bath here?" Ning Shuima felt that something was wrong. "Just now Mr. Zhong came into the Xiaoyao pavilion and told me. He also said that you prepared a delicious base for me. Where is the base?" Kieran looked at her eagerly. Ning Shuima's heart suddenly sank. Mr. Zhong did not know that she was taking a bath here, and he would not let Kieran come in at this time. Of course he would not lie about the base. The image of the red-clothed evildoer flashed in her mind. Needless to say, it was that bastard who did this. Did that bastard disguise himself as Mr. Zhong to trick Kieran? Then what was his purpose in doing this? She suddenly jumped out of the water and reached out to grab her clothes. "You were fooled. Let's get out of here." Her fingertips hadn't even hooked onto her clothes when a faint golden light flashed above her head. A large net fell from the sky, covering Ning Shuima and the little Cheelin with lightning speed. Ning Shuima reacted quickly. She immediately sank into the water and wanted to take the opportunity to swim away. However, the water in the lake was too shallow. As soon as she sank into the water, the pale golden net covered her and drilled into the water. After a while, the big net was pulled out of the water with a splash. Ning Shuima and Kieran were trapped in the net like two big fish. "Got it. Got it. She really came back. And the little Cheelin is also here." It was unknown when two men had appeared on the lakeside. They all looked to be in their 30s, and their clothes were extremely ordinary. However, their eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, and their actions had the dignity of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. They looked at Ning Shuima and Kieran in the net, and their eyes flashed with surprise. One of them raised his sleeve, and the big net that trapped Ning Shuima and Kieran flew towards him. Bang! Ning Shuima and Kieran crashed into him along with the net. That person was knocked back a step. He was still a little puzzled. The strength of his net was not so strong. How could there be such a strong impact? He subconsciously pushed the net away and took another step back. Suddenly he realized that there was something in his hand. He lowered his head to take a look. In his hand was a small brownish-red ball. "What is this? Cheelin's inner core?" He raised his hand to his eyes and wanted to take a closer look. Suddenly, he heard his junior brother not far away shouting, "Senior brother, throw it away." Before he could finish his sentence, he heard a loud bang. It sounded like a firecracker had exploded. That person's hand shook, and a cloud of smoke spread out in front of him. Countless fine needles shot out from the smoke. The distance was too close, and that person had no time to dodge. He groaned and was shot by several fine needles. Those fine needles were obviously coated with poison. After being shot, that person's body swayed and his face twisted. "It's itchy. It's so itchy." He reached out and scratched his body. After a few scratches, he suddenly screamed and fell to the ground. Chapter 300. The other person was shocked. He didn't care about Ning Shuima and Kieran, who were still trapped in the net. He jumped over and said, "Senior." He reached out his hand to help him. "It's itchy. It's itchy." In the blink of an eye, the person who was hit by the needle felt itchy all over his body. He had scratched his whole body. When he saw his junior coming over to help him, he couldn't help but scratch his junior again. "It's so itchy." He tried to stay awake and said, "Junior, quick, ask the girl for the antidote." The junior finally came back to his senses. He immediately looked at the big net and his body stiffened. The girl and Kieran, who were trapped in the net, had already escaped. Only the light golden net was left on the ground. How could it be? His senior brother's net was a mechanism magic tool. Not only was it incomparably tough, no sharp weapon could cut through it, but there was also a mechanism at the mouth of the net that could only be broken by his senior brother. Once he was caught in the net, he could forget about escaping by himself. But this girl actually cracked the mechanism in such a short time and escaped. How did she do it? Kieran stood in the same place and looked at them angrily. All the scales on his body were standing up. The girl flew up and landed on the big rock in the middle of the lake. Her clothes were still on the big rock. She had to put on her clothes first. Just as her hand was about to touch her dress, a hand suddenly appeared out of thin air and snatched the dress away from her. Then it disappeared. Ningxuama was a step too late and missed her dress by a hair's breadth. Pervert in red. Get your ass out here for big sister. Ningxuama was furious. Although she only caught a glimpse of that hand, there weren't many hands that were so delicate in this world. Moreover, she saw the bright red sleeves of that person. Among the people she knew who liked to wear such flashy red clothes and had such a perverted personality, there was no one else other than that evildoer in red. Little girl, take out the antidote. That junior marshal brother couldn't hold himself back any longer. He shouted at the young girl standing on the big rock. There was a faint red light in his palm that was about to be spat out. Ningxuama raised her head and glanced at that person. She crossed her arms and spoke without any trace of politeness. Trespassing into someone else's mansion, plotting against the owner of the mansion, and you still want the antidote? Are you still dreaming? That junior marshal brother was furious. Little girl, you've got guts. Do you know who we are? If you know what's good for you, hurry up and send the antidote over. Otherwise, I'll let you have a taste of the Lee heart fire. Fire of the heart? Centrifugal force. Ningxuama sneered. Her gaze fell on the back of the junior brother's hand, and the corner of her lips curled up again. 1, 2, 3. The junior brother didn't understand why she suddenly started counting. Seeing that his senior brother was already delirious from the itch, he anxiously attacked. With a wave of his hand, 5 fireballs flew towards Ningxuama. He wanted to knock her unconscious and subdue her first. Unexpectedly, just as his 5 fireballs flew halfway, Kieran opened its mouth and spat out a water arrow, meeting the fireballs head-on. Water countered fire, and the fireballs vanished into thin air. That junior marshal brother was stunned. He had forgotten that this Kieran was a water Kieran 8, 9, 10. Ningxuama crossed her arms in front of her chest and counted to 10. That junior marshal brother was impatient from her counting. Just as he wanted to change his move, he suddenly felt an unbearable itch on the back of his hand. Once that itch happened, it instantly spread throughout his entire body. In a split second, the itch almost reached his heart. It was so itchy that he wanted to scream. Chapter 301. It was so itchy that he wanted to scream out loud. He forced himself to stand upright and shouted out, "We are the protectors of the limitless sect. You can't hurt us." After shouting out this sentence, he couldn't stand anymore and fell to the ground. Just like his senior brother, he rolled his body on the stone ground. Ningxuama slowly walked over and looked down at the 2 people who were rolling on the ground. The protectors of the limitless sect. Their position wasn't low. Moreover, the limitless sect wasn't considered a righteous sect. Their methods were more sinister, and they were a sect that would do anything to achieve their goals. Once someone offended this sect, they would be hunted down by the entire sect. Since Ningxuama planned to stay in this continent, she naturally understood the matters of the various sections. She didn't like to kill people, but sometimes she had to kill. She slowly walked towards the 2 people and her eyes turned cold. "You 2 can go on your way." With a flick of her finger, 2 poison needles shot out and pierced into the hearts of the 2 people. The 2 people finally stopped itching, but their eyes instantly widened as they stared at the little girl. Their mouths were gurgling as if they didn't believe that she would be so ruthless. "You 2 originally had bad intentions towards me, so it's natural for you to die in my hands." Ningxuama looked down at them coldly as they breathed their last breaths. "Such a vicious girl. But I like it." Someone in the air clapped twice, as if he was cheering for her. A red figure appeared on top of a large stone. They seemed to be from some sect and they looked quite strong. "You killed the 2 of them, aren't you afraid of being hunted down by their sect?" "I'm not afraid," Ningxuama calmly replied. She had completely offended these 2 people. Once she gave them the antidote, they would definitely not let her go. She didn't know what kind of suffering they would give her. So these 2 people must be killed. While they were talking, the bodies of the two people on the ground actually curled up again. There was juice bubbling on their bodies and the smell of burnt flesh came out. The two people's bodies were melting and disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The red-clothed man narrowed his eyes. Little girl, your ability to destroy corpses is not small. Aren't you going to ask who sent them? Ning Xuema glanced at him. Do you even need to ask? Other than you, who else would tell them my whereabouts? You want to threaten me when they catch me? Threatening me to become your servant? Humph, in your dreams. The little girl was so smart. He actually guessed it correctly. The man in red looked at her with admiration. Little Xuema, you are very smart. I suddenly feel that it's a waste of your talent to be a servant. Of course it was a waste of talent. It was more appropriate for her to be his master. This bastard actually knew her name. It seemed like he had already investigated her behind her back. Ning Xuema stretched out a hand and said, "Give me back my clothes." Her clothes were still in his arms. The red-clothed man smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming as he looked her up and down several times. Suddenly, he said in an incomparably serious manner, "Little Xuema, I've discovered that you've actually grown taller again. Oh, your figure seems to be starting to look good as well. Also, your little outfit is very interesting. You're dressed like this, standing in front of a big man like me. Why don't you know how to be shy?" Ning Xuema sneered. "Thank you for the compliment. I'm already good-looking, there's no need for you to say it. As the saying goes, don't look at indecent things. You stole my clothes like a thief and you still have the face to say that I'm dressed like this?" Chapter 302. Ning Xuema found it strange as well. Ever since she started cultivating the martial arts that Jiu Zun had taught her, not only was she oozing greasy mud every time, she was also growing taller. Her originally flat body was also starting to develop. Every time she cultivated, it was like she had been reborn. In just 2 days, she had grown 5 to 6 centimeters taller, and her figure was starting to become curvaceous. In addition, she was only wearing her self-made underwear, which was equivalent to a modern bikini, revealing her fair arms and legs. It made her body look even more curvaceous, and she had the charm of a young girl. Ning Xuema's original body had been malnourished for a long time, and her body had not developed well. She still looked like a 10-year-old child at the age of 13. Now, after a few days of cultivation, her figure was already that of a normal 13-year-old girl. Not only had she grown taller, her skin was also much fairer than before. She was originally a beauty in the making, and after developing, she finally became a beauty. When her eyes turned to the side, there was a natural charm to them. In addition, her appearance was sweet and pure, and her every frown and smile radiated brilliance, making it hard for people to shift their eyes away from her. Her feet were now bare. Her feet were white and soft, as if they were carved from jade. Her toenails were pink and glossy, shining like pearls under the starlight. The man in red looked at her feet, his gaze deeper. This girl's face might not be the prettiest, but her feet were beautiful. They were like crystals. He looked at her pair of tiny feet and actually felt something. The little Qilin had been paying attention to Ning Xuema's expression. When it saw Ning Xuema's expression, it immediately took a step forward and stood in front of Ning Xuema, blocking most of her body. Naturally, it also covered her little feet. It angrily said, "You big pervert, what are you looking at?" The man in red's gaze turned to Ning Xuema's face. "Shui Ilan." Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. "What? My name?" The man in red's eyes were as deep as water, and there was a smile at the corner of his lips. "Remember it?" Ning Xuema turned to leave. "I'm not interested in your name." She only hoped that he would go far away and not provoke her again. There was a flash of red in front of her eyes. Shui Ilan stood in front of her. "Wait." Ning Xuema took a step back and looked at him warily. "What are you doing?" Shui Ilan opened her dress and handed it to her. "Come, put on your clothes. Although you look good like this, it's enough that I'm the only one who can see it. As for the others..." He glanced at Kirin with hostility. "If anyone else sees you like this, I'll gouge their eyes out." His last sentence was too sinister. The little Qilin quivered and shivered. It angrily glared at him. "Who are you? Why should I only show it to you? She's my master, not yours." I've decided that I don't want her to be my servant. She can be my concubine. Concubine knows husband's name, and only husband can see concubine's body. Shuailan made an earth-shattering announcement. Kiran was speechless. Are you having a fever? Ning Shuama was also shocked. She picked up her clothes and took a few steps back. Ignoring his crazy words, she quickly put them on. Shuailan looked at her with a smile. If you don't object, then I'll take it as a yes. Yes, my ass. Ning Shuamo refuted him. I'm not interested in you. Even if you want to marry me as your wife, I won't agree, let alone being a concubine. The outside world is beautiful. It's not easy for you to come out. You should go out and walk around. Don't look for me again. She turned around and left. Chapter 303. She had just taken a few steps when her waist suddenly tightened. She didn't even have time to scream before her body was lifted up into the air. A voice chuckled beside her ear. The outside world is really not bad. Accompany me for a stroll. Ning Shuama's expression changed. Her body was tightly held in Shuailan's embrace, and she couldn't move for a moment. The wind whistled past her ears, and the scenery in front of her quickly flashed by. Kiran shouted, "Let go of my master. Where are you taking her?" It wanted to chase after him. "Little colt, if you're not afraid of being caught, then chase after me." Shuailan chuckled, and his laughter dissipated in the wind. Kiran was startled. It immediately rolled on the ground and turned into a blue cat. When it jumped up again, the red-clothed evildoer had already disappeared without a trace with its little master. It pressed its little paws on the ground, trying to get rid of it. That won't be so easy. Its body shot up into the treetops like lightning, and it flew all the way, chasing after them. "Where are you taking me?" Ning Shuama struggled in his embrace. This guy's qigong was actually so good. It was practically no different from flying. Wherever he went, it was like a flash of a shadow. There were obviously spies from various sects wandering around outside her residence, but not a single one of them discovered their whereabouts. "I'm taking you to see the outside world. What's the point of being cooped up in the residence all day?" Shuailan didn't loosen his grip on her arm. "Hey, you're hurting me." Ning Shuama struggled again. This scoundrel also wrapped her arms around his, making it hard for her to breathe. "Be good. Endure it for now." Shuailan didn't have any intention of letting go, and flew even faster. "Red-clothed evildoer, you swore you wouldn't hurt me." Ning Shuama was angry. "And I didn't hurt you. Call me by my name. If you call me by my name, I might loosen up a little." Shuailan laughed gently. Ning Shuama secretly gritted her teeth. She took a deep breath and finally couldn't do anything to him. "Shuailan, this should be fine, right? Loosen up a little. I'm about to throw up from your strangling." That's more like it. It's just that when you say my name, it's a little stiff. It's not very comfortable to listen to. Why don't you call me?" He seemed to suddenly have an epiphany. "You can call me Lan Shan. In the waning night, my blood-red clothes are like fire." Ning Shuama shuddered. Lan Shan. Isn't this name a little feminine? There were even poems and allusions. Not bad, that's good. Shuailan was obviously very satisfied, and his arms loosened a little. Ning Shuama secretly clenched her teeth. "This sister is going to beat you into a pulp." She smiled and looked at him. "You won't do anything bad to me, right? I'll take good care of you." Shuailan lowered his head and kissed her forehead. "I think we're quite compatible. Match your head." Ning Shuama smiled again. "Your Excellency must be joking. You've lived for at least a few thousand years, and I'm only 13 years old. It's said that 5 years is a generation gap. You and I are so different, and the generation gap between us is like the Mariana Trench. It's definitely insurmountable. I think it's better for Your Excellency to find someone similar to you." While she was talking nonsense with him, one of her hands was secretly moving behind his back. She lowered her hand slightly, and a blue steel needle appeared at the tip of her finger. She was about to pierce one of his major acupoints on his back when her wrist suddenly tightened. Shuailan seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. A strand of black hair wrapped around Ning Shuama's wrist like a snake and pulled it to the front. Chapter 304. TSK little Shuama, you're really hiding a dagger in your smile. This poison needle is the kind you used to make those two people disappear, right? TSK. I'm your future husband. People say that a woman's heart is the most poisonous. This saying is indeed true. Shuailan shook his head and sighed. At the same time, he raised his hand and took the poison needle from Ning Shuama's hand. He pointed the tip of the needle at Ning Shuama's fingertip. Shuama, did you bring the antidote for this needle? What do you think will happen if I stab you with it? Ning Shuama's expression changed slightly. She glared at him with hatred. Why don't you try it? If I die, you'll have fulfilled your oath. Then you'll be locked in that crystal coffin for 10,000 years. Shuailan sighed. I'm not afraid of fulfilling my oath. We're monsters, so we don't believe in gods. That oath can't bind me. He really doesn't believe in gods. Damn it, I was fooled by him back then. You believe in the demon ancestor? Ning Shuama asked tentatively. What do you think? Shuailan blinked his eyes. If you don't want to say it, then forget it. Ning Shuama closed her eyes. When you marry me, I'll tell you everything. Shuailan's tone was gentle. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead again. But you're too naughty. I have to teach you a little lesson. Before Ning Shuama could understand what he meant, his arm suddenly loosened. Ning Shuama couldn't help but fall downwards. A vast expanse of white water rushed towards her. At this moment, Ning Shuama was able to recognize where this water body was. Netherworld Lake. It was the only big lake in Chongkong Country's capital, Jialan City. There were countless man-eating aquatic beasts in the lake. The Netherworld Lake that made everyone shrink back in fear. At that time, the fake Hui Dao was lured into this lake and eaten by the monsters. She didn't expect that this bastard evildoer who kept saying that he wanted to marry her would actually throw her in here. The monster at the bottom of the lake seemed to have smelled something. It popped its head out of the water and looked at Ning Shuama, who was descending from the sky. It bared its sharp teeth. Ning Shuama couldn't help but fall towards the mouth of a monster. Her expression changed. At this time, she could only save herself. Fortunately, she had refined a lot of poisonous needles recently. She waved her hand and shot a poisonous needle at the mouth. When the poison needle entered the monster's mouth, the monster quivered and closed its mouth. At the same time, Ning Shuama's body landed next to the monster's mouth. Her hand was about to enter the monster's closed mouth. Ning Shuama really couldn't dodge, so she could only close her eyes and wait for her arm to be cut off. Damn it, the small lesson he was talking about was to cripple her. This pervert. At this critical moment, her ankle suddenly tightened. Then she was pulled by a strong force. She was lifted upside down and flew into the air again. Little Shuama, how does it feel? Shuailan's laughter was like a cool breeze. It was indescribably pleasant. Ning Shuama's little face was pale. Her whole body was trembling slightly. Suddenly she cried out, "What do you want? You can just kill me." Ooh. Shuailan was stunned. He had never seen her cry before. He held her ankle and inevitably saw her exquisite snow-white feet. His throat moved slightly. "How can I bear to kill you? You should stay by my side obediently in the future." As he spoke, he flipped her over. Ning Shuama turned in the air and finally, her head was facing up. Shuailan reached out and wanted to hold her waist. Suddenly, a golden light flashed in front of him. A big net was coming toward him at lightning speed. Chapter 305. By the time he reacted, he had already been trapped in a pale golden net. Bastard, go and die. Ning Shuama took the opportunity to step on his body and used the momentum to fly to the shore. Shuailan fell directly into the lake with the net wrapped around him. Ning Shuama's feet landed on the shore and her heart calmed down. She pulled the light golden rope on the other end of the net and looked towards the lake. The place where the net fell was like a boiling pot. Countless beasts popped their heads out and then sank back down. Blood flowed out and dyed that small part of the lake red. Ning Shuama's heart was beating fast. She looked at the body of water and smirked proudly. This bastard, he actually schemed against her. Now that he was the one being schemed against, he deserved it. Ning Shuama was an expert in mechanisms. The net used by the two elders of the Limitless sect to plot against her in the Marquis estate was a mechanism net. At that time she had easily broken it. After killing those two people, she had also quietly put away the net. Now it was just the right time to use it on this red-clothed pervert. This net was made of a very special material. It was not afraid of knives, axes, fire, or water. Unless the mechanism on the net was broken, the person trapped inside would not be able to escape. The moment Ning Xuema used the net to trap Shui Lan, the mechanism on the net was completely locked. Unless she pulled the net onto the shore or loosened the rope in her hand, there would be a chance to break the mechanism now. That fellow could only be trapped in the net. The holes in the net were very fine. Even if Shui Lan knew the bone shrinking technique, he would not be able to squeeze out. Many of the beasts in the lake had long and sharp mouths. They could reach into the holes in the net to peck at him. Shui Lan, this time I will make you a bloody tattered person. She stood on the shore and watched as the boiling water gradually calmed down. A few beast corpses floated on the surface of the lake. The corpses were dark purple. It was obvious that they were poisoned. Ning Xuema let out a sigh of relief. After a while she slowly pulled the net back. She pulled it back very carefully. Shui Lan was too cunning. She had to be careful. She could feel that the net was much lighter. It must be that the pervert's flesh and blood had been eaten, leaving only his bones in the net. Master! A little blue cat flew over like lightning and plunged into her arms. It looked at her with a pair of bright eyes. Master, are you okay? Where is that bastard? Ning Xuema used one hand to reel in the net, while the other hand rubbed the little blue cat's head. He's in the net and fell into the water. The little blue cat was naturally Kirin. It had experienced the power of the net and knew that it could not be opened with brute force. It was slightly relieved. It looked into the water and suddenly sniffed. There is a beast in the water. That's right. It's also a very savage monster. When it sees flesh and blood, it swallows them whole. Not even the bones are left behind. While speaking, Ning Xuema had already pulled the net to the shore. When she lowered her head to look, she was stunned. There was nothing in the light golden net. There were only a few pieces of dark red blood stains. There was not even a bone left. Couldn't be, right? That person was a big monster. How could he die like that? Even his bones were dragged out and swallowed by the beast? Although this net could only be entered and not exited, and she added poison to the net for insurance. The poison she applied was enough to kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Chapter 306. Although this net could only be entered and not exited, she had added something to the net just to be safe. The poison she applied was enough to kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But seeing him disappear without a trace, Ning Xuema still felt that it was too easy. It was unreal. However, looking at the floating corpses of the beasts, she felt that she had succeeded. The poison she applied was very strange. Once a person was poisoned to death, if the beasts ate his corpse, they would also die from the poison. However, these beasts' corpses would not die from the poison. It seemed that these beasts had eaten his corpse. Otherwise, he would not have died. Kirin circled around the net and sniffed the bloodstains. She was a little puzzled. This blood has a fishy smell. It smells like the beasts in the lake. It doesn't smell like that person's. Ning Xuema's heart sank. Could it be that person did not die? That's impossible, right? If he had successfully escaped, wouldn't he have immediately appeared to take revenge on her? How could he have escaped so quietly? She looked at the net in her hand. Her eyelashes drooped slightly. With a shake of her hand, she threw the net back into the lake. With a splash, the limitless sex treasure sank to the bottom of the lake and could no longer be seen. She clapped her hands and picked up the little blue cat. Little apple, let's go. Just as she turned around, her feet paused. Not far behind her stood a man dressed in white. His figure was tall and straight like a jade tree. His appearance was incomparably handsome, but his expression was a little haggard. At this moment, his eyes were focused on Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema's lips curled up slightly. She raised her sleeves and saluted. Her tone was indifferent and distant. Your Highness. That person was Ji Yunhuang. Ning Xuema's politeness clearly made him uncomfortable. He paused and took a step forward. Xuema, it's good that you're fine. I'll look for you in the next 2 days. Ning Xuema cupped his hands again. Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. I'm fine. If there's nothing else, I'll... Before she could say goodbye, Ji Yunhuang interrupted her. I have something to discuss with you. Why don't we find a place to sit? What's the matter? Ning Shuama didn't want to move. A trace of pain flashed through Ji Yunhuang's eyes, but he still smiled faintly. It's a very important matter, so it won't take up too much of your time. Don't tell me you won't even give me this much face? After all, Ning Shuama was still living in this country. She didn't want to offend him too much. She smiled faintly. Your Highness is too polite. Your Highness, please. His attitude was polite and distant. Ji Yunhuang's fingers tightened as he forced a smile. All right, let's go. After Ning Shuama and Ji Yunhuang left, the Netherworld Lake returned to its usual tranquility. There were many ferocious beasts in this place. Usually very few people would come here. That was why when Ning Shuama and Shuailan created such a big commotion here, no one came to watch. The grass on the shore was luxuriant, and the lake rippled gently. After a moment, the center of the lake suddenly surged up like a fountain. On top of the water, a person slowly rose. He was wearing red clothes and had black hair. He looked gentle and elegant like jade. It was Shuailan, who Ning Shuama thought had been eaten by the monsters. He floated in the center of the lake. The nearby aquatic monsters surrounded him from afar. Each and every one of them arched their bodies as if they were worshipping him. Shuailan looked at Ning Shuama and Ji Yunhuang walking side by side. His dark eyes slightly narrowed. What a ruthless and straightforward little girl. Chapter 307. What a ruthless and straightforward young lady. She was as cunning as a little loach. When he was not paying attention, he was plotted against by her again. However, he liked it. Only a young lady like her was worthy of him. Only a young lady like her was worthy of staying by his side. The image of her delicate little feet flashed across his mind, and he swallowed slightly. Perhaps it was unfair for her to stay by his side as a concubine. When he caught her again, he would tell her that he could raise her status to become a concubine. The place that Ji Yunhuang chose to sit was a tea house. Ning Shuama had visited this tea house a few days ago. She had even met the sixth prince Ji Yunhao and Hu Daichang. Because of a teapot, they had gotten into an argument. Ning Shuama plotted against Hu Daichang and received 3 lashes from Ji Yunhao. In the end, she was rescued by the crown prince Ji Yunhuang. Although it had happened more than 20 days ago, Ning Shuama felt like it was a lifetime ago when she revisited this place. Too many things had happened in the past 20 days. No matter if it was people or her mood, they had all changed. Hu Daichang was dead, and the sixth prince was demoted. As for her, she did not know how many times she had been on the brink of death, but she was still strong enough to live in this world. However, her situation was still not good. The old emperor's engagement had not been annulled. Because of the Kirin incident, many sects and forces were secretly eyeing her covetously. Ning Shuama noticed that the most famous and elegant tea house in the city was cleaner and quieter than the last time she had been here. Originally, the upper and lower floors of this tea house were very clean, but this time it was especially clean. It was as if everything had been wiped with alcohol. If she used a magnifying glass to look at it, she was afraid that she would not be able to find a single speck of dust. Even the waiter of the tea house was wearing new clothes. His face was clean and his walking speed was light and fast. There were many people drinking tea downstairs, but all of them were holding their breaths and sitting upright. Everyone's face was filled with excitement, but they forcefully suppressed it and pretended to be calm. Even if they were talking, their voices were low, as if they were afraid of disturbing something. Their eyes swept upstairs from time to time. What was upstairs? What's wrong with these people? Ning Shuama looked at Ji Yunhuang with a questioning gaze. Ji Yunhuang slightly furrowed his brows. It was obvious that he did not know the inside story. He looked at the waiter who was leading the way. The shop assistant was quick-witted. He immediately bowed and said, "Your Highness, Master Han Shanyue is upstairs painting." His voice was low, and when he said the 3 words Han Shanyue, it was especially low and respectful. Ning Shuama raised her eyebrows. Not only did she know the name of this Han Shanyue, it was like thunder in her ears. The 3 words Han Shanyue represented the most famous painting saint on the continent, the most famous fortune teller on the continent. He was the most mysterious expert on the continent. Experts all had weird tempers. Even if some people were not experts, They would still develop weird tempers in order to pretend to be experts, let alone real experts. This Han Shanyue was one of the best and was the most outstanding among the freaks. He was so cool and clean that everything he used could not have a single flaw. Wherever he went, he had to use clean water to clean it, and the people who served him had to burn incense and bathe. He did not paint casually, but every painting he made was a priceless treasure. His fortune-telling was accurate, but he did it based on his preferences. If he did not want to tell the fortune of the current emperor, he would not buy it. He also had unfathomable kung fu. Chapter 308. The reason why he was said to be mysterious was not because he was the best in martial arts and was unrivaled in the world, but because he was indifferent and would not easily fight with others. Once he fought, he had never lost. Since he was the art saint, he naturally did not lack money. Moreover, he did not keep a low profile in the way he dressed. Any random accessory on his body was worth tens of thousands of gold. Some items were even worth hundreds of thousands of gold. No matter where he went, he was like a moving treasure trove. This kind of person naturally attracted the attention of people from all walks of the martial arts world. There were countless people who wanted to plot against him to make a fortune. But it was strange. This Han Shanyue was obviously just one person. No matter how many people those gangs sent to kill him, they were all like meat buns thrown to a dog, never to return. No one had ever seen him in action. Those who had seen him were no longer living in this world. His whereabouts were uncertain. On this continent he had been seen in all 5 countries. No one knew where he lived. It was as if he suddenly appeared when he was supposed to. And when he left, there was no sign of him at all. As he walked, he disappeared. There were once busybodies who followed him, but they could not find him halfway. Some said that he disappeared into thin air, while others said that he rode the clouds and left. In short, the rumors were very mysterious. This also made him even more mysterious. Ning Shuama did not expect that she would meet this great god in a trip to the tea house today. Her heart was filled with curiosity. So when Ji Yunhuang found out that the upper floors of this tea house were all booked by Mr. Han Shanyue, and that they could only drink tea downstairs, he suggested that they go to another tea house, but was rejected by her. She picked a seat that faced the stairs and sat down. She smiled and said, "Your Highness, let's talk here." She waved her hand and asked the waiter to bring 2 pots of good tea. Ji Yunhuang looked at her with a complicated expression. The things he wanted to talk to her about needed to be discussed in a quiet room, and not in this hall where there were other customers. But now, he did not want to go against her wishes. This time she was obviously much colder to him. If she was angry and ignored him, he would have the confidence to coax her. But she was neither cold nor warm to him, and was very polite. It made him feel a kind of fear that he would never be able to get her back. When His Highness the Crown Prince came, the waiters in the tea house naturally didn't dare to be negligent. The tea was the best tea, the pot was the best pot, and the snacks were also the best snacks. Ning Shuama glanced at the small red clay pot. She naturally recognized this pot. It was the same model she used last time. It should be a new one. It seemed like this crown prince wanted to evoke her nostalgia and make her forget the unhappy past. The crown prince was quite attentive. Unfortunately, Ji Yunhuang seemed to be an expert in brewing kung fu tea. He personally brewed the tea, and his movements were smooth and fluid. His every movement was filled with the free and easy demeanor of a noble, which was very pleasing to the eyes. Ji Yunhuang, the crown prince, did not keep a low profile, so the citizens of the capital were not unfamiliar with him. This was especially true for the customers of the tea house. Most of them were officials and nobles, so they were naturally more familiar with him. When Ji Yunhuang came in with Ning Shuama, there were many people who stood up to greet him, but Ji Yunhuang dealt with them with a few words. These people knew that the crown prince did not want to be disturbed, so they did not dare to come close to him, but they still paid attention to the table. Chapter 309. These people diverted part of their attention to pay attention to the movements of this table. Seeing that Ji Yunhuang was personally brewing tea for the girl in front of him, they all widened their eyes in surprise. They secretly sized up Ning Shuama, trying to guess her identity. Since they noticed her, they naturally noticed the blue cat with glossy fur lying on her lap. The cat's 2 hind legs were standing on her lap, and its 2 front paws were holding a piece of tea. It was eating it in small bites, and it was eating very delicately and elegantly. It squinted its eyes slightly, obviously enjoying the food. Its expression was too rich, attracting the attention of half of the people in the tea house. There were some young girls drinking tea in the tea house, and their eyes would occasionally look at the blue cat, wishing that they could hug it and touch it. Shuema, try my culinary skills. Ji Yunhuang handed over a cup of tea. Ning Shuema did not decline. She took the cup and took a sip. Your Highness, tea brewing skills are brilliant. The blue cat immediately raised its head and said, Master, I want to drink too. Heavens, this cat can talk. Its voice was very pleasant to hear. Much better than the parrot's. Everyone's gazes became even brighter. Under everyone's gaze, Ning Shuema casually placed the teacup in front of the blue cat. The cat picked it up with its two front paws and tasted it like a human. Not bad. It raised its head and drank it in one gulp. Everyone was speechless. Did this cat become a spirit? Its every action was like a human's. Also, this girl actually gave the tea that the crown prince poured for her to the cat. Wasn't this too disrespectful to the crown prince? Everyone's gazes secretly looked at Ji Yunhuang's expression. Ji Yunhuang did not bat an eyelid. He took another teacup and poured another cup for her. Come drink this. Many thanks, Your Highness. Ning Shuema thanked him again. Shuema, must you be so polite to me? Ji Yunhuang's eyes darkened. I'm not being courteous. It's the proper etiquette I should have in front of Your Highness the Crown Prince. Ning Shuema smiled faintly. Ji Yunhuang seemed to be choked by her words and paused for a moment. You weren't like this before. Originally, it was Shuema who was young and insensible. Please don't blame me, Your Highness. I would rather you treat me like how you did in the past. Ji Yunhuang's eyes darkened. Ning Shuema raised her hand and took a sip of tea. Her smile became more clear. The past is the past. Your Highness, no one can go back to the past. Was there really no way to return to the past? No, he couldn't accept it. Ji Yunhuang looked at her calm demeanor and sighed softly. Shuema, you've changed. Ning Shuema didn't care at all. Your Highness, no one stays the same. Are you still blaming me? Ji Yunhuang frowned bitterly. Your Highness worries too much. How could Shuema blame Your Highness? Your Highness protecting your own sister is a matter of course. After all, I'm just an orphan of the Marquis Mansion, an outsider. Ning Shuema's tone was indifferent. Shuema, I know it was Yunyao's fault that day. I wronged you. Your injuries, are they serious? These past 2 days I've been looking for you in the Heavenly Book Mountain. I was afraid that you might have met with an accident. Your Highness, don't worry. Shuema's injuries have already healed. Your Highness doesn't need to worry. The two of them exchanged a few more words. Ning Shuema remained indifferent, polite, and distant. Ji Yunhuang tried his best to pull the two of them closer, but to no avail. Chapter 310. The blue cat was eating to its heart's content. While the two of them were talking, it had already swallowed 2 plates of pastries and 3 cups of tea. The crown prince looked at Ning Shuema again and his eyes slightly moved. Shuema, you've changed. Ning Shuema raised her hand and rubbed her forehead. Your Highness, you just said this once. No, I'm talking about your figure and appearance. In just 2 days you've grown a lot. She was originally a beauty, but at that time her beauty was that of a child's innocence and cuteness. Now she had the charm of a young girl. He had not seen her for 2 days. How could she change so much? Ji Yunhuang's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly reached out and grabbed her wrist, wanting to check the psychokinesis in her body. However, just as his fingers touched Shuema's soft and tender skin, she flipped her wrist and unexpectedly escaped from his palm like a slippery fish. Hey, what are you doing? The little blue cat jumped onto the table and roared at Ji Yunhuang. It had been unhappy with this man for a long time. A younger sister had injured its master for the sake of that unreasonable younger sister of his. Could it be that she still wanted to harm its master now? Ji Yunhuang was stunned. This human and beast were obviously on guard against him, which made him feel a little hurt. He bitterly smiled and stared at Ning Shuema. Shuema, I just want to check your psychokinesis. I don't have any other intentions. Ning Shuema carried the angry blue cat off the table and raised her head with a smile. Shuema is a psychokinesis trash. Didn't you already test it? Why does Your Highness need to test it again? Ah, no wonder I found her familiar. So she's that psychokinesis trash, Ning Xuang. Someone at the table next to them blurted out. This person's voice was not soft and the tea house was quiet. Almost everyone in the tea house heard him. Almost everyone's eyes were burning as they looked at her, unscrupulously sizing her up from head to toe. The originally quiet hall began to be filled with buzzing noises. Those people were apprehensive of Ji Yunhuang's presence, so they all lowered their voices and discussed with the people at the same table. From time to time they would exchange looks of understanding. Kiran's ears were sharp, and she heard all their voices. It was nothing more than, so it really is her. Wasn't she captured by bandits? Why is she with the crown prince again? A piece of trash dares to put on airs in front of the crown prince? I really don't know what she's so arrogant about. By the way, I heard that before the ancestor left, he gave the emperor a message. Could it be related to this woman? What did the ancestor say? How come I didn't know about it? Tell me quickly. Quick, tell me. The ancestor spoke in Zen language. Aya, that sentence is too profound, I can't remember it at the moment. I think he said something like a jinx or something. My father heard it with his own ears, so it can't be wrong. Bang! The teacup in Ji Yunhuang's hand suddenly fell to the ground. This clear and loud sound caused the entire hall to quiet down. The buzzing sounds of discussion finally stopped. Everyone's gaze landed on Ji Yunhuang. Ji Yunhuang's voice was indifferent. Those who speak nonsense will be killed without mercy. His imposing manner was astonishing. Most of the people present were the children of the country's high officials and nobles. They were still very afraid of this crown prince. When his gaze swept past them, they all lowered their heads. Ji Yunhuang secretly took a deep breath, as if he had finally decided on something. He said in a deep voice, "This Miss Ning is the daughter of Marquis Jing Yuan. She is intelligent and sensible. This prince admires her very much. In the future I will marry her as." Chapter 311. Before he could say the words crown princess, a cold voice suddenly came from upstairs. Who is making a ruckus downstairs? The voice was like ice and snow flowing past everyone's ears. It was the end of summer, and the weather was still a little hot. In this era there was no air conditioning, so even the best tea house's indoor temperature was still very high. But when this voice came out, everyone felt as if they had suddenly drunk a cup of iced tea. Their bodies felt cold, and their spirits were lifted. Ning Xuema's heart also jumped. Hearing the voice, she raised her head and saw a person appear at the staircase. When this person appeared, everyone's eyes lit up. It was as if the entire tea house's taste had been raised by several levels in an instant. It was a young man who looked to be about 20 years old. He was wearing a loose moonlight robe. The robe was like a painting with a mountain rock and a cluster of bamboos. As he moved, the shadow of the bamboos was reflected on the mountain rock, as if it was dancing under the moonlight. It made people feel as if they were in a forest, and they could feel the sounds of nature. This person stood on the stairs, and the light behind him made his face blurry. His appearance could not be seen clearly, but he vaguely felt that he was very handsome, very elegant, and very extraordinary. In the darkness of the candlelight behind him, he was like a top zither player playing the high mountains and flowing water, making people forget everything. Almost everyone in the hall held their breaths. Han Shanyue. Needless to say, this person was the legendary Han Shanyue. He was indeed like the cold moonlight on the cold mountain, making people feel as if their hearts were cleansed by the moonlight. Han Shanyue's gaze slowly swept across the hall, pausing on the little blue cat. His eyes moved again and finally fell on Ning Xuema's face. He stood in a place with his back to the light, so Ning Xuema could not see his face clearly, but she could clearly feel his gaze. She subconsciously met his gaze. That gaze seemed to have a penetrating power, making her heart jump again. She felt a sense of familiarity. It was a bit like when the ancestor looked at her through the palanquin. There was also an inexplicable sense of familiarity, making her heart suddenly tremble. Han Shanyue's gaze fell on Ning Xuema. Come up. Why did he call her? Other than the blue cat beside her, which was rather eye-catching, there was nothing special about her. Why did this arrogant Han Shanyue suddenly ask her to go up? She wasn't close to him. A bunch of bright gazes turned to Ning Xuema. Their gazes were filled with all kinds of emotions. Some were surprised, some were puzzled, and some were gloating. Of course, those young girls looked at her with eyes full of jealousy. He was obviously a well-known piece of trash, so why did so many experts treat him favorably? The ancestor had once sent a servant to serve as a judge for her, and the crown prince had saved her many times. Lu Ti had even wanted to make her his concubine. Now this mysterious and otherworldly person, Han Shanyue, had personally asked her to go up. Had all these big shots been bewitched by this little girl? Why? Ning Shuama naturally felt the malice coming from all directions. Especially that jealous gaze, she couldn't be more familiar with it. Whether it was in her previous life or this life, she was often baptized by such gazes. She had long been numb. Sir, the one who made some noise and disturbed your painting was me. If you have any dissatisfaction, I apologize to you. This girl is innocent. Chapter 312. Mr. The one who made some noise and disturbed Mr.'s painting was me. If Mr. is dissatisfied, I will apologize to Mr. This young lady is innocent. Ji Yunhuang extended his hand and pulled Ning Shuama behind him without batting an eyelid. Then, he stepped forward bravely and lightly shouldered the responsibility. Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Ji Yunhuang's back with a complicated gaze. As long as this crown prince did not implicate his sister, he treated her quite well. This matter happened because of me. Your Highness, you don't have to take responsibility for me. Ning Shuama came out from behind Ji Yunhuang. She was not worried about the debts that she had accumulated. Anyway, there were many people who wanted to make things difficult for her. She did not need this strange person in front of her. Moreover, Ning Shuama had an intuition that this strange person would not make things difficult for her. No, this matter has nothing to do with Shuama. I was the one who made a ruckus. I was also the one who threw the cup. Ji Yunhuang pulled Ning Shuama again. Wanting to pull her back, Han Shanyue stood on the stairs and looked at the two of them who were trying to make excuses for each other. His dark eyes narrowed slightly, looking somewhat unfathomable. The two of you can come up together, he said faintly and turned around to go up the stairs. Ning Shuama and Ji Yunhuang looked at each other. Ning Shuama did not care. She would go up. It was just a ruckus. What could this strange person do to her? She lifted her leg and was about to go up the stairs when Ji Yunhuang pulled her back. I will be in front. A black shadow flashed by the door. Two people who were dressed as imperial bodyguards entered and blocked Ji Yunhuang's path. Their faces were solemn. Your Highness, don't take the risk. Ning Shuama felt that the two guards were making a fuss over nothing. She was just going to meet a weirdo, the sage of painting. Did they have to make it seem like she was going into a tiger's den? Ji Yunhuang seemed to have read Ning Shuama's mind and quietly said to her, 3 years ago, there was a rather influential young master who quarreled with someone in front of Han Shanyue, which affected the painting sage's work. He was thrown down the stairs by the painting sage with a wave of his sleeve. He fell until he was half dead and laid in bed for more than a year before he recovered a bit of his vitality. However, his martial arts were completely crippled. So brutal. Ning Shuama couldn't help but glance upstairs. It was really hard to equate that person with a violent person. Mistress, don't be afraid. I'm here. Kiran licked her finger, indicating that she would stick by her side. Shuama, no matter what, I won't let you get hurt again. Ji Yunhuang held her other hand. He casually pushed aside the two imperial bodyguards who were blocking the way. Both of you step back. His aura was very strong. The two imperial bodyguards didn't dare to stop him and could only step aside. Your Highness, please allow us to follow you. No need. Ji Yunhuang waved his hand. Both of you can wait here. Han Shanyue didn't like to have too many people. Moreover, he didn't allow anyone to go against his words. He said that he would let 2 people in, so he wouldn't allow him to bring any more subordinates. Moreover, Ji Yunhuang was also a proud person. His martial arts were considered top-notch in this continent. If he really wanted to fight, he didn't believe that he wouldn't be able to last 3 moves in front of the Sage of Painting. As long as he could last 3 moves, the elite bodyguards he had arranged outside would rush in. Therefore, he didn't need to let his bodyguards take the lead to boost his courage. The 2 imperial bodyguards were also very smart. They immediately understood Ji Yunhuang's intention. They bowed and stepped back, no longer obstructing him. Chapter 313. The two guards were also very smart and immediately understood Ji Yunhuang's intention. They bowed and retreated, no longer stopping them. Ji Yunhuang kept holding Ning Xuema's hand. Ning Xuema actually did not want to be so close to him, but Ji Yunhuang's fingers held her hand tightly, and she could not break free. She could not use too much strength or directly attack him, so she could only let him hold her hand. Forget it, it's just holding hands, it's not worth anything. In her previous life, she still had arms around her brother's shoulders. The two of them went up to the second floor together. Finally, they saw the layout of the second floor. The main hall was a little spacious, but the most eye-catching thing was a round rosewood table. On the table there was a large piece of drawing paper, paint, brushes, inkstone. Everything was there. There were two very clean and agile children who were grinding the ink, arranging the paint, and doing some other work. There were no ordinary candles in the main hall, only a large luminous pearl hanging above the drawing table. The luminous pearl was like a small moon, bright but not dazzling, illuminating the whole drawing table. The scene was like a stage, but the spotlight only shone on one side of the stage, and the other places were still dim. Master Han Shanhua stood in the shadow in front of the table, and the luminous pearl shone brightly behind him, but his whole person was like a silhouette. Ning Xuema stood at the staircase, but she still could not see his face clearly. It seemed that this art saint did not want people to see his face clearly, so he was very good at using the light effect. Although he did not wear a mask, it was not much different from wearing one. "Sir, why did you call us up?" Ning Xuema wanted to cup her hands, but when she raised them slightly, she realized that her hand was still in Ji Yunhuang's hand. Han Shanhua looked at them, and his gaze paused on their hands. Kiran was lying in Ning Xuema's arms, and it was also staring at Han Shanhua. It suddenly felt that the temperature of the surrounding air seemed to have dropped a little. Then its eyes suddenly widened. All the hair on its body stood on end. 9 Supremes. Ning Xuema could clearly feel that something was wrong with Kiran in her arms. She could communicate with Kiran telepathically, so she immediately asked, "Little Apple, what's wrong?" Kiran looked at Han Shanhua again and paused for a moment before replying, "No, nothing. Yes, it's a little cold." The fur on his body slowly became docile. His heart was beating wildly. It had indeed recognized him, but that person had transmitted his voice to it in time to prevent it from revealing anything. Right now, Kiran was most afraid of him. Even though he felt that he would be letting his master down if he didn't reveal this person's identity, he still held himself back and obediently lay down on the ground. He wouldn't harm Master, right? That shouldn't be the case. He actually treated its owner quite well. There must be a reason why he didn't want it to say anything now. It was better for it to make a fortune quietly. Ning Xuema couldn't care less about Kiran's subtle mood changes. Besides, the temperature upstairs was indeed much lower than downstairs. The two servants who were waiting on them had already put on their jackets. If it wasn't for Ning Xuema's profound cultivation, she would have shivered a few times from the cold when she entered. Han Shanhua pointed at Ji Yunhuang with his sleeve and said, "You stand there." He then pointed at Ning Xuema and said, "Come and grind the ink for me." He made such a big fuss to call her up just to grind the ink. Chapter 314. Ning Xuema was a little embarrassed. For such a small request, she naturally wouldn't go against the other party. She took the opportunity to break free from Ji Yunhuang's hand and walked over. Ji Yunhuang was stunned. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but as if he was worried about something, he finally shut his mouth. He only reminded Ning Xuema behind her back, "Xuema, be careful." Ning Xuema did not even turn her head. She only made a peace sign with her hands behind her back to show that she understood. She finally saw the painting that Han Shanhua had just drawn. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. It was a half-finished painting of mountains and rivers. Mountains of different heights were covered by clouds and fog. In the middle of the mountains there was a waterfall. Beside the waterfall were jagged rocks. This was actually similar to the scenery she had seen on the 9th peak of Tianshu Mountain after the illusion had disappeared. Ning Xuema raised her eyes to look at Master Han Shanhua. From her position, the master's face was still a little blurry. Even at such a close distance, she still could not see his face clearly. A thought suddenly floated into Ning Xuema's mind. Could this Master Han Shangyue be the Nine Supremes' illusion? She was shocked by her own thought and could not help but look at him a few more times. Han Shangyue did not look at her and only ordered, "Grind." His palm landed on the half-drawn drawing paper, and the drawing paper suddenly emitted a faint white smoke, and the whole drawing paper instantly disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuema asked, "Why did you destroy this painting?" She felt a little heartache. That painting had both form and spirit. When she first saw it, she wanted to take a second look. After the second look, she actually had the illusion that she was there. Although Ning Xuema did not know much about painting, it should be a successful piece of work to be able to easily bring people into the mood of the painting. What a pity it was to destroy it. She could still sell it for a lot of money if it was given to her. "It's dirty," Han Shangyue answered succinctly. The art boy beside him also had a pained expression on his face. They were prodigies in the field of painting, and could be considered as genius artists. This time, they were invited by the tea house to assist Master Han Shangyue. Naturally, they were very willing to come. Just now, when they saw Han Shanyue's painting, they saw how his brush moved like dragons and snakes. The mountains and rivers seemed to come alive under his brush, and they were mesmerized. Although it was only half a painting in their eyes, it was already a peerless treasure. They didn't expect this master to destroy it just like that. They couldn't even see where the stain was. No matter how he thought about it, the two of them must have startled the great master with their sudden clamor. That was why this peerless masterpiece was destroyed in a single day. The two boys glared at Ning Xuema with resentment. Ning Xuema just pretended not to see it. Instead, she smiled and said, "It's just a small flaw. Why are you so demanding?" At this moment, the two children had already unfolded a new piece of paper and smoothed it out. Ning Xuema was also a nimble person. She grinded the ink in a few seconds. She didn't know why, but the ink seemed to bite her hand. Just as she finished grinding the ink, her fingertips inexplicably cut a small hole. She couldn't retract her hand in time, and a drop of blood dripped into the ink. "Let me grind it again?" Ning Xuema knew that the art saint in front of her was a perfectionist. She resigned herself to her fate and wanted to throw away the ink that was stained with her blood. "It's okay." Han Shangyue raised his hand and pressed it on the ink slab. Ning Xuema couldn't retract her hand in time, and his hand was pressed on the back of hers. His hand was as cold as ice. Ning Xuema shivered from the cold. She frowned and was about to withdraw her hand. Chapter 3:15. His palm was as cold as ice, causing Ning Xuema to shiver from the cold. She frowned and was about to withdraw her hand, but the other party had already withdrawn his hand. He even used a white handkerchief to wipe his hand. Ning Xuema was speechless. She remained calm and collected as she unhurriedly took out a silk handkerchief from her bosom and wiped the back of her hand where he touched it. Han Shangyue looked at her and did not say anything. He started to paint. His tone was calm as he answered Ning Xuema's question. "Since you can get the best, why would you want the flawed one? I can't tolerate any flaws." He was obviously a perfectionist. Ning Xuema looked at his spotless outer robe, and then looked at his hand that was holding the brush while painting. His fingers were clean and slender with distinct joints. They were as white as jade. He moved the brush as he wished. Mountains, trees, lakes gradually appeared under his brush. Ning Xuema suddenly held her breath. She was familiar with this scene. It was the scene she saw in the illusion. The leaves that were like palms, and the vast lake that was sparkling with clear light. Ning Xuema was in a trance. It was as if she had walked into the illusion of the ninth peak. The green leaf stage, the little ginseng baby sitting on the stage. The scenes flashed through her mind like a movie. The two painters standing by the side suddenly felt that something was wrong with Ning Xuema. She stared at the drawing paper while Han Shanyue's brush was flying. The scenes under his brush danced as if they were flying. What was even more strange was that the scenes on the drawing were flashing and disappearing at the same time. Huh? Was there something wrong with the brush? The two art assistants widened their eyes and were about to open their mouths when Han Shanyue suddenly glanced at them. The two of them felt dizzy and couldn't think of anything else to ask. They just mechanically helped him out. Ning Xuema's eyes were like a drunkard. She followed Han Shanyue's brush and the memories of the ninth peak in her mind began to disappear. Yunhuang stood at the door and watched from afar. At first he was on guard, afraid that Han Shanyue would do something bad to Ning Shuama. Later, when he saw that Ning Shuama was only given the job of grinding the ink, he heaved a sigh of relief. He knew a lot about painting and was very curious about what this great master Han Shanyue had painted. He wanted to go forward and take a look, but he was afraid of offending this art saint. He stood there and watched Ning Shuama's movements. When he saw her standing beside Han Shanyue and staring at the drawing paper as if she was drunk, his heart itched. Finally, Han Shanyue stopped and threw the brush into the brush holder. It's done! Ning Shuama's body, as if she woke up from a dream. Her legs seemed to have gone numb from standing and her body swayed violently. Be careful! Ji Yunhuang subconsciously wanted to rush over and support her. However, he didn't know what he stepped on. His toes hurt and his legs went numb. He almost fell down and hurriedly held onto the railing next to him. When he steadied himself and looked at Ning Shuama again, he saw that Han Shanyue had one arm around her and placed her on a chair next to him. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. Was he seeing things? The art saint Han Shanyue, who was usually difficult to approach, was actually helping a girl? However, seeing that he was helping her openly and Ning Shuama almost fell down, Ji Yunhuang didn't say anything. The numbness in his legs had disappeared. He walked over to Ning Shuama and looked at her face. Shuama, are you okay? Chapter 316. Ning Shuama felt as if she had just woken up from a strange dream, but she could not remember what was in the dream. She shook her head and stood up. I'm fine. Have you finished painting? Ji Yunhuang looked at the painting on the table. It was a painting of a mountain with a misty rain. The strokes were experienced and the charm was ethereal. It was indeed a rare painting. However, he felt that the painting was missing something but he could not tell what it was. Ning Shuama naturally saw the painting too. She was slightly stunned and felt that the painting she saw just now was not the one in front of her. She looked at the ink on the painting again. It was new and the ink had not dried yet. It was obvious that it was just completed. She shook her head. She was probably too tired these past 2 days. Her mind was a little muddled and she might have seen wrongly. Since you helped me grind the ink, I'll forgive you this time. Han Shanyue opened his mouth and raised his hand to roll up the painting. He handed it to Ning Shuama. A painting is a gift to a fated person. This painting is yours. Ah, he gave it to her. This master's painting was hard to come by. Ning Shuama's eyes lit up and she immediately thanked him. Ji Yunhuang also heaved a sigh of relief. He bowed and said, "Thank you, master." He then stretched out his hand to pull Ning Shuama. Shall we go too? This time, Ning Shuama raised her hand and avoided him. Ji Yunhuang's eyes flashed with sadness. Han Shanyue suddenly opened his mouth again. Since I'm in a good mood today, I'll give you another divination. Ji Yunhuang's eyes lit up. Master, please tell me. In the future, when the wind and clouds meet, you will become a dragon. You must break through the barrier of love. Han Shanyue gave him a few words. Ji Yunhuang understood the first sentence. It meant that he would become the emperor in the future. But did he need to break through the barrier of love to become the emperor? Was his barrier of love an obstacle to the throne? It couldn't be. His gaze fell on Ning Shuama. Would she be an obstacle to his ascension to the throne? That was impossible. Shuama had no power or influence, and she didn't have many connections with the other princes. How could she hinder his ascension to the throne? Ning Shuama felt goosebumps all over her body as he stared at her left and right. Without batting an eyelid, she took a step back. Initially, she did have a good impression of the crown prince, but now she was very sure that she would not fall in love with this crown prince. She smiled and said, "Congratulations, Your Highness. In the future, you will definitely be able to fulfill your wish." Her eyes then fell on Han Shanyue and asked, "What was the divination that Grandmaster gave me?" Han Shanyue spoke slowly, word by word. Heaven's bane. The fate of a 1,000-year lone phoenix. Ning Shuama. Fuck. Did he think that she was a 1,000-year-old bachelor? Although Ning Shuama didn't know much about metaphysics such as numerology, she still understood the meaning of these 8 words. To put it simply, she was destined to jinx all her relatives. Whoever was her relatives would be unlucky, and would be jinxed to death by her. Parents, brothers, sisters, husbands, children. None of them would be able to escape. No matter how many times she married, in the end, she would be left alone, facing the autumn wind alone. Ning Shuoma seemed to see her old self, walking alone on the desolate mountain road with a walking stick, gradually disappearing in the sunset. This future was too beautiful, she couldn't imagine it. She was really drunk. This little body was not only a good-for-nothing, but it was also a jinx star. How unlucky must she be to have transmigrated into this body? Ning Shuoma didn't want to believe it at first. Chapter 317. Ning Shuoma did not want to believe it at first, but when she thought of the original owner of the body, Ning Shuoma's parents who died early, and her brother who died early, she heard that her brother died on the battlefield in the same year she was born. Damn. She was actually able to match the words heavenly cursed lone star. However, the original owner of the body, Ning Shuoma, had died long ago, so her fate should have changed, right? Perhaps she had already changed her fate when she transmigrated. At the very least, the people she cared about were still alive, and well, Yunhuang naturally heard what Han Shanyue said about Ning Shuoma's fate. And his expression changed slightly. Master Han Shanyue's words were actually similar to what the ancestor had said to his imperial father before he left. He remembered that before he left, Lu Hin-ti suddenly asked the ancestor to calculate Ning Shuoma's fate, and the ancestor said 7 words, 1,000-year lone phoenix roaming the world. Then, the venerable ancestor left with his entourage in front and behind him. However, Lu Hin-ti remained in a daze for half a day. After that, Lu Hin-ti gave the order to revoke the imperial edict that conferred Ning Shuoma the title of imperial concubine. After that, he sternly warned him not to have any thoughts about Ning Shuoma anymore. He was actually skeptical about this and didn't really take his father's words to heart. He continued to look for Ning Shuoma everywhere. Later, when he found out that Ning Shuoma had subdued Kirin, he felt that she was not ordinary. Kirins were not only divine beasts, but also auspicious beasts. It was said that wherever this beast appeared, there would be peace and prosperity. He originally wanted to use the fact that Ning Shuoma had subdued Kirin to persuade his father to change his mind and agree to make her his imperial concubine, but he did not expect that the iron-mouthed Han Shanyue would give him a blow to the head. Your Highness! Your Highness! Your Highness, it's not good, something happened to the princess. Suddenly, a young girl's panicked voice came from downstairs. Ji Yunhuang's expression changed slightly. He could tell that the young girl downstairs was Ji Yunyao's personal maid. He could not help but look at Ning Shuoma. Shuoma. Ning Shuoma waved her hand. Your Highness, please go quickly. You don't need to care about me. Ji Yunhuang wanted to say something, but the maid downstairs urged. Your Highness, please go and take a look. The princess is really in trouble. Ji sighed. Shuoma, to go take a look, to find you, to look for you, to return. I'll to find you later. His figure, he went downstairs in a flash. Ning Shuoma stared blankly at Ji Yunhuang's back. Although she didn't have any feelings for Ji Yunhuang right now, seeing him leave her in this place surrounded by a pack of wolves, she still felt a bit disappointed. You like him? Han Shanyue's voice was neither salty nor light, and there was no emotion in it. Her heard. Naturally answered. Han Shanyue seemed to be choked by her straightforward answer, and his voice became even fainter. You are not fated to be with him. Ning Shuoma smiled. She suddenly picked up Kirin, who had been squatting on the chair, and kissed the tip of its nose. I also like it. Kirin was so excited that it almost reverted back to its original form. Its pair of blue eyes were watery. Master. Its whole body of blue fur was almost turning pink. Master kissed it. Master smells so good. Kirin happily squinted its eyes, and when it raised its head, it met Han Shanyue's eyes. It suddenly shivered and shrunk its neck. Its tail curled up and it curled up on the chair again. Han Shanyue lightly said, So this is what you like. You will kiss whoever you like? Ning Shuoma smiled. I like to kiss cuter ones, for example. Chapter 318. She then picked up Kirin and kissed it on its eyes. This little guy was too cute. Every time she kissed it, it would cover its face with its paws. Han Shanyue was speechless. He spoke again. You are destined to be a loner, so you must not get too close to others. Otherwise you will harm them. Ning Shuama lowered her eyes and thought of number 2. It seemed that what Han Shanyue said was true. Those who were close to her and treated her well were all unlucky. The little Qilin couldn't help but speak. Master, you still have me. I'm not a human. Our lives are tied together. As long as Master is well, I will also be well. As it spoke, it kissed Ning Shuama's palm. Ning Shuama touched Kirin's head and was touched. Kirin was such a loyal friend. Even if you are not human, you cannot do it. Han Shanyue continued, no matter who you like, you cannot be too close to them. Otherwise they will be unlucky. Damn, he made it sound like she was a jinx. She was just a little unlucky recently. In the past, everything was smooth sailing. Her friends in the modern world were so close to her, but they did not die because of her. How could it be as exaggerated as he said? Did this Han Shanyue have a grudge against her? He purposely said that in front of others. She glanced at the 2 children who were watching from the side. She knew in her heart that it wouldn't be long before her reputation as a super jinx would spread throughout the world, just like her reputation as a trash. No one would dare to get close to her in the future. She rolled her eyes, as if she had suffered a blow. Suddenly, she jumped onto Han Shanyue's body, hugged his neck, and fiercely kissed him on the cheek. If being close to him would cause bad luck, then she would get closer to him. She would pass on all her bad luck to him. The 2 of them were very close to each other. Her movements were as fast as lightning. Han Shanyue was not prepared at all, so her sneak attack succeeded. He froze. The other 2 children were dumbfounded. Their mouths were so wide open that a duck egg could be stuffed into them. The mysterious, noble and untainted art saint was kissed by a girl? If this was spread out, it would be a huge scandal. The little Qilin's eyes were also wide open. Master. Master is too valiant. His face was as smooth as jade. When Ning Shuama got close to him, she could even smell the light and unique fragrance on his body. Ning Shuama wanted to get back at him, so she wanted to kiss him and leave quickly. However, she was distracted by the faint fragrance on his body. She couldn't escape in time. Impudent. Han Shanyue's face darkened as he spat out 2 words. He didn't seem to do anything, but with a wave of his sleeve, Ning Shuama, who was hugging him, flew out. Crash! Ning Shuama's body crashed through the window and flew out of the 2nd floor onto the street. There were a lot of people on the street. When they saw a person flying out of the tea house, they were all shocked. When Ning Shuama landed, she almost stepped on the face of a passing teenager. Fortunately, Ning Shuama's reaction was fast. While her body was in the air, she immediately adjusted her body and gently landed beside the youth. Damn it! This bastard was really ruthless. He actually threw her down from the 2nd floor. He was quite strong too. She couldn't help but crash into the window. The sandalwood window was smashed by her. The burning pain in her shoulder made Ning Shuama's face turn pale. She raised her head and looked at the broken window on the 2nd floor. She started to wonder if she should go upstairs to find that person for revenge. Chapter 319. Master! The little Qilin shouted and jumped down from the window. Ning Shuama reached out to catch it, but this action affected the wound on her arm, and it hurt so much that her little face turned pale. Master, are you okay? Kirin worriedly reached out its 2 little claws to touch Ning Shuama's injured arm. Ah, you're bleeding. It's okay, it's just a superficial wound. Ning Shuama slapped away Kirin's little claws to prevent it from accidentally scratching her again. Little girl, you are indeed bleeding. Why don't you let me take you to the clinic for treatment? A rather glib voice interrupted. Ning Shuama turned her head and saw that the one who spoke was the young man she had almost hit when she fell from the window. The young man was wearing a flashy purple robe and was waving a fan in his hand. He had a smooth face and a pair of peach blossom eyes that fell on Ning Shuama's body, which was a little stunning. This girl was delicate and beautiful. Although she was a little embarrassed after being thrown down like this, it could not hide her beauty. Coupled with the bloodstains on her arm, it made her look even more beautiful. This was really a beauty that fell from the sky. The young man with the fan was instantly moved. He looked at Ning Shuama with eyes that were filled with spring water. Ning Shuama had a stomach full of anger that she had nowhere to vent. She knew that the young man was flirting with her just by looking at his eyes. Especially his eyes, which were staring at her chest. as if he wanted to extend a pair of hooks from his eyes and hook her clothes so that he could see the scenery under her clothes. She actually met a young thug who was flirting with people on the street. This was a common scene in novels. She really wanted to beat him up. Ning Xuema pursed her lips. My injury. It's not a big deal. I don't want to trouble you. Her voice was as delicate as an oriole's. She turned around and wanted to leave, but the young man opened his fan and blocked her way. Little girl, it's better to follow me. That's right, that's right. Follow my young master. My young master will treat you well. That's right. Our young master has always been kind and loves to show mercy to women. You almost hit our young master just now, but our young master didn't make a fuss about it. Don't fail to appreciate our kindness. Obediently follow our young master. In the blink of an eye, 4 or 5 more servants surrounded Ning Xuema, intentionally or unintentionally surrounding her in the middle. It was obvious that these people were the young man's henchmen, and were used to cooperating with their young master. Kiran was annoyed and wanted to scratch her with its claws. Ning Xuema pressed Kiran's head to calm it down. She blinked her eyes and said, Child, are you really taking me to the medical center for treatment? Her eyes were watery, and when she blinked, half of the young master's bones melted. That's right. Young lady, feel free to follow this young master. Come, I know the most famous doctor who can bandage your injury properly. He reached out his wolf claws to hold Ning Xuema's little hand. Before Ning Xuema could react, Kiran couldn't help but scratch him with its claws. Its movements were as fast as lightning, and the young master couldn't dodge in time. 3 deep blood grooves appeared on the back of his hand. The young master screamed and jumped up, shaking his hand desperately. My hand, Kiran scratched him with its claws, and the blood in the grooves flowed freely. In the blink of an eye, the young master's wolf claws turned into bloody claws. Chapter 320. How dare you hurt our young master? You must be tired of living. Our young master is the only son of Duke Ding. Kill this cat. All the servants aggressively surrounded her, wanting to snatch away the Kiran in Ning Xuema's arms. Ning Xuema also frowned and lifted Kiran by the back of its neck. Little apple, who allowed you to randomly use your claws? Look, aren't your claws dirty? His other hand took out a piece of silk from who knows where and carefully wiped the little Chilan's claw, wiping away the bloodstains on it. Finally, he casually threw the silk away. All the servants were speechless. The young master's face turned green. How dare you? You actually let your cat hurt people. Men, take her down. The young master ordered in a flustered and exasperated manner. All the servants answered in unison, yes. They stretched out their hands to grab Ning Xuema's eyes flashed with killing intent. Just as she was about to do something, a shadow suddenly appeared. A black shadow flashed from the side, and everyone only saw a blur in front of their eyes. Suddenly, 4 people directly crashed into the circle of people. As the shadows moved, the servants were thrown out one by one, wailing incessantly. When the dust settled, the servants surrounding Ning Xuema were already lying on the ground. 4 of them who looked like imperial bodyguards bowed to Ning Xuema. Miss, you have been frightened. Ning Xuema sized up the 4 of them. You are? Reporting to Miss, we were sent by the Crown Prince to protect Miss Ning. One of them respectfully replied. It turned out that Ji Yunhuang did not abandon her and even sent 4 imperial bodyguards to protect her. Ning Xuema also recognized one of the imperial bodyguards. He was indeed from the Crown Prince's residence. She had met him once when she stayed in the Crown Prince's residence for a short period of time. She nodded and indifferently glanced at the young master with the fan who was trembling at the side. Does this young master still want to take me down? Although the fan bro wasn't beaten up, he was almost scared to the point of wetting his pants. He didn't expect that the little girl in front of him, who didn't even bring a maid, was actually the person that His Highness the Crown Prince wanted to protect. Even if he had 8 guts, he wouldn't dare to challenge His Highness the Crown Prince. At this moment, seeing these 4 personal guards of the Crown Prince's residence, how could he dare to let out half a fart? He hurriedly smiled apologetically. It's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding. The servants were ignorant and scared the young lady, please forgive us. Then don't kill my cat? Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. Of course not. Miss, your cat is very clever, very clever, it's a good cat. The man with the fan smiled apologetically as he signaled to the servants who had just gotten up from the ground. The group of people left with their tails between their legs. Miss, do you want to return to the residence or go to the medical center to have a look? The leader of the 4 imperial bodyguards asked. Let's go back. Ning Xuema waved her hand dispiritedly. She could deal with the small wound on her shoulder by herself. She glanced at the window on the 2nd floor again. The big hole was still there, but the light inside was much dimmer, as if the person inside had already left. Forget it, she wouldn't lower herself to the same level as that person. The current her wasn't that person's opponent at all. She hugged the cat and turned around to leave. Strangely, she felt that the smell of that person was somewhat familiar, as if she had smelled it from an old friend. But she couldn't remember who it was at that moment. She kept feeling that she had forgotten something, but she couldn't remember what it was at that moment. Inside the 2nd floor 2 little art boys stood at the side trembling, while that Master Han Shanyue stood in front of the table with an expressionless face. Chapter 321. The painting he drew was still on the table. Ning Xuema didn't have time to take it away. This girl's behavior was too frivolous. She shouldn't be able to recognize him and didn't know who he was. To her it should be the first time they met. She actually hugged him and kissed him without any hesitation. Did she like to be close to men so much? She was obviously a genius, but her behavior was so unrestrained. How many people had she kissed? He didn't go near the window, but he seemed to be able to see everything that was happening on the street. The 2 children only felt that the temperature in the room was getting lower and lower. They stole a glance at Master Han Shanyue's face, but due to the angle of the light, they still couldn't see his face clearly. They could only faintly feel that this master seemed to be in a bad mood. One of the children plucked up his courage and said, "Master, you don't need to lower yourself to the same level as this vulgar girl. She doesn't deserve this painting. You deserve it?" These 2 words were thrown over. It directly made the child shiver and shut his mouth. Han Shanyue raised his sleeve. The peerless painting on the table spontaneously combusted and turned into a pile of ashes. The 2 children opened their mouths, but didn't dare to say anything. They watched the painting burn. Suddenly, their eyes were in a daze. The people in the tea house's hall naturally heard the commotion on the 2nd floor. Everyone was bewildered. The owner of the tea house courteously asked a few questions upstairs, but he didn't get any response. After a while, the owner finally carefully went upstairs to check. However, he found that there was no trace of the art saint upstairs. Only the 2 children were left standing there in a daze. The owner asked them a few times before the 2 children seemed to come back to their senses. However, their eyes were blank. They actually forgot more than half of what happened just now. The owner asked them for a long time, but he didn't get any information. They didn't even know when the art saint left. One of the children was in a daze for a moment. Suddenly, he seemed to remember something and shouted, "I remember now. Master Art Saint said that girl is a jinx. 1,000-year-old lone phoenix." A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Everyone who came up to watch the show was stunned. The people of this world naturally understood what this heavenly cursed lone star meant. That orphan girl of Marquis Jingyuan's mansion was a heavenly calamity, an unprecedented jinx, a jinx. No wonder Marquis Jingyuan and his wife died early. Even their only son died on the battlefield. So it was because of this daughter. The 6th prince had already broken off the engagement with her, but he was still beaten up because of her. He was stripped of his official position and became a commoner. The crown prince was also a little infatuated with her because he was a little closer to her. Therefore, he was severely reprimanded by the emperor in just one night. The rumor that Ning Xuema was a jinx had spread throughout the city, and was still spreading at the speed of light. Within a few days, Ning Xuema's life had undergone earth-shattering changes. First, the maids and servants in the mansion came to resign. No matter how high the salary old Zhong offered them, they were determined not to stay. Money was indeed a good thing, but one had to be alive to take it, right? Taking care of a heavenly calamity, they might lose their lives here. In less than 5 days, Old Zhong was the only one left in the bustling and lively Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. Old Zhong was very upset. Chapter 322. Old Zhong was very uncomfortable. These days, the little master had painstakingly managed the Marquis Jingyuan mansion to get on the right track with great difficulty. He didn't expect that the Archsage's prophecy would turn the Marquis Jingyuan mansion back to its original state. It became the most depressed and desolate place. These days he had been running around wanting to hire some people with high salaries. However, Ning Shuama's reputation as a heavenly calamity star was even more resounding than her reputation as a trash. When the people who were looking for work outside heard that the mansion was recruiting, they all shook their heads like a rattledrum and refused to come no matter what. Old Zhong ran around outside for 6 or 7 days, but he still couldn't find a single person. On this day, he came back with a gloomy face and looked everywhere for Ning Shuama. Finally, he found her in the side hall of the chastity-testing beast. Compared to old Zhong's gloomy face and worried heart, Ning Shuama was a lot calmer. Nothing could be seen on her face. She still looked very carefree. She refined medicine as usual, practiced martial arts as usual, ate as usual, and even strolled around the garden admiring the flowers as usual. Old Zhong felt that the little master's heart must be very bitter. She was just putting up a front and didn't want others to see her as a joke. The little master's attitude was really good. For example, right now, she was chatting and drinking with the ferocious chastity-testing beast. Her face was very comfortable. Little master. Old Zhong walked in. Uncle Zhong, you came back. Come and drink 2 cups. Look at how sweaty you are after running around. Ning Shuama gave him a praying mat and poured him a cup of wine. Old Zhong felt even more guilty. Little master, this old servant is useless. I still couldn't find anyone. Ning Shuama smiled. It's fine if you can't find anyone. This matter can't be rushed. We'll talk about it later. Come, let's eat first. These days, even the cooks in the kitchen had all run away. Ning Shuama simply ordered takeout from a restaurant outside. The food looked, smelled, and tasted good. It was even better than the food made by the original cooks. Although the current Marquis Jingyuan's mansion was as cold and cheerless as before, Ning Shuama was no longer the same as before. Now that she had an endless amount of money to spend, she naturally wouldn't suffer. Old Zhong saw that Ning Shuama was smiling and her little face was rosy. She didn't look worried and haggard at all. He asked tentatively, Little master, in the future, what if we can't recruit people? Ning Shuama smiled and reached out to pat him on the shoulder. If you can't recruit them, then so be it. Didn't we go through the same thing before? That was true. Marquis Jingyuan's mansion had been deserted for several years already. As long as she was a bit more diligent, these rooms could still be tidied up. It's all that Han Shanyue's fault. Why did he have to say that my miss is a jinx? Just a simple sentence from him could make his young miss fall into hell right now. They were only unable to recruit servants. What would happen if the young miss were to find a husband in the future? With such a reputation, who would dare to propose marriage? What if Miss couldn't get married in the future? How could he face the Marquis and his wife? Old Zhong was worried. He was really worried. His face was wrinkled like a walnut. Uncle Zhong, you're also old. If you want to leave, I can give you a large sum of money. Ning Shuama opened her mouth. No. Old Zhong swears to follow little master to death. Old Zhong immediately interrupted her. His face was flushed red. Miss, what kind of person do you think I, Old Zhong, am? Since you want to follow me, then be happy. Ning Shuama took a cup of wine and handed it over. In this world, there's no obstacle that can't be overcome. It's not the end of the world yet. Why are you so worried? Come, have a cup of wine. Chapter 323. Old Zhong was startled. He took the cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. That's right, there's no obstacle that can't be overcome. Ning Shuama leisurely smiled. That's right. Old Zhong drank 3 cups of wine in a row and added, there will definitely be a wise hero who will take a fancy to Miss and marry Miss. Ning Shuama spat out a mouthful of wine. So this was the reason why Old Zhong had such a worried expression on his face for such a long time. He was worried about her marriage. Uncle Zhong, I'm only 13 years old. Why are you so anxious about marriage? I feel that my current situation is actually quite good. Ning Shuama sat cross-legged and lazily said, Miss is naturally not old now, but in our Chongkong country, if a girl is 15 years old and still can't find a husband, she will be criticized. Old Zhong was still worried. There are still 2 years left. There's no hurry. Ning Shuama didn't care at all and drank another cup of wine. Come. This restaurant's crystal prawns are pretty good. Uncle Zhong, have a taste. She successfully shut old Zhong's mouth from worrying about her marriage. Ning Shuama truly felt that this kind of life was actually not bad. After her reputation as a heavenly cursed star came out, although the servants in the mansion had all left, the sects that were eyeing her covetously and wanted to rob her also disappeared without a trace. They were all afraid that she would jinx them to death. Even Kiran and the others didn't dare to covet her anymore. Also, the old emperor's imperial edict to confer her as a consort was silently revoked by the old emperor. 2 days ago, the old emperor summoned her to the palace and asked her a few questions from afar. He expressed his concern for the daughter of a meritorious official, and then let her go. He didn't mention anything about conferring her as a consort. As for Ji Yunhuang, ever since he was taken away by a maid in the tea house, he never came to find her again. He was probably frightened by her reputation as a heavenly cursed star, and didn't want to have anything to do with her. As for Ji Yunhao, he had already been banished from the city by the old emperor. Without the emperor's summons, he didn't have the qualifications to enter the city. Therefore, Ning Shuama also didn't see him again. Even if they met, they would probably be strangers. Now that she thought about it, all the problems that caused her headaches had disappeared along with the rumors of her being a heavenly cursed lone star. Her days had become unprecedentedly leisurely. Ever since she had transmigrated, she had been in all kinds of dangerous situations. She had wandered in front of the gates of Yama's palace several times. It could be said that she had narrowly escaped death. It was rare to be able to live such a leisurely life. It was rare for her to have so much time to practice. In just 10 days or so, her inner strength had indeed improved, and even her telekinesis had begun to increase greatly. Yesterday she had broken through to mortal rank level 4, and was now able to use the psychokinesis in her body as she wished. Ning Shuama felt very satisfied. The only thing that made her unsatisfied was that she seemed to have forgotten something. For example, she had forgotten who taught her how to cultivate her telekinesis. She had even forgotten how she managed to tame Kiran. When she asked Kiran, this fellow was even more confused than her. After staring at her for a long time, he finally said, "Wasn't it Master who saved me from a cave? That's why I established a contract with you, didn't I?" Ning Shuama vaguely remembered that there was indeed such a cave. However, her memory seemed to be covered by a layer of fog. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't remember what happened in the cave. Fortunately, she was the type to look forward. Since she couldn't remember, she might as well not think about it. In any case, Kiran was now by her side, alive and well. That was enough. Chapter 324. Although there were fewer people in the Marquis's mansion, there was also less work to be done. If he made do with it, he could still live a carefree life. The chastity-testing beast was not picky as long as it had wine and food to eat. After all, it was a human soul that lived in its body, so its nest was quite clean and did not need anyone to clean it. It also did not need anyone to wait on it. The only thing that gave her a headache was that there were too many rooms in the Marquis's mansion. Even if old Zhong cleaned it from morning to night, he would not be able to clean it all. Therefore, Ning Shuama simply asked old Zhong to seal up a few courtyards, leaving only a few that were still in use. It was not bad to clean it up. After eating and drinking to her heart's content, Ning Shuama got up and ordered old Zhong to prepare the carriage. Today, she would go to Heavenly Book Mountain to pick herbs and hunt again. After a few days of cultivation, Ning Shuama found that her ability to absorb fire and wood crystals was stronger. She could directly absorb crystals that were 5th level and below. This could help her improve her skills faster. With Kiran by her side, hunting was as easy as flipping her hand. Even the beasts on the mountain were afraid of it. When Kiran heard that they were going to Heavenly Book Mountain to hunt again, it was very happy. It could eat meat again. This time, entering Heavenly Book Mountain was very smooth. Ning Shuama rode Kiran for less than 8 hours and arrived at the falling flower peak of the 5th peak. More than 10 days ago, Ning Shuama had brought number 2 here to pick the heavenly ice grass. Now that she was revisiting this place, even the carefree Ning Shuama felt a little sad. It was on this peak that she and number 2 were taken away by an eagle. Number 2 died miserably on the 9th peak, and she seemed to have taken some risks and finally escaped from the peak. Ning Xuema felt that her memories of the 9th peak were the most blurry, as if they had been deleted by someone. The heavenly ice grass had changed her body better than ever, so Ning Xuema wanted to pick it again. She was feeling sad at the bottom of the peak when she suddenly heard the sound of fighting on the peak, mixed with the hissing of snakes. Could it be that someone else had reached the peak before her? Ning Xuema patted Kiran's head. "Little apple, let's go too." Kiran climbed the mountain as if it were flat ground. In just a few jumps he had already reached the top of the mountain. Then, Ning Xuema finally saw the man who was fighting with the 3 snakes. Her heart skipped a beat, and she blurted out, "Sure too." Only after she called out to him did she realize that something was wrong. Sure too was the nickname of bodyguard number 2. He was about 20 years old when he was killed. On the other hand, the young man in front of him looked to be at most 15 or 16 years old. His face was much younger than number 2's, and his body was much thinner. The young man was already injured in many places, and his handsome face had already turned green. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. This young man had good swordsmanship, and his psychokinesis was also not bad. 3 giant pythons besieged him, yet he still could not be taken down. However, he was poisoned after all, and his limbs were no longer as nimble as before. There were a few times when he was entangled by the giant python. This young man could not fight anymore. If he delayed any longer, the snake venom would attack his heart. At that time, even the Daoyuo Golden Immortals would not be able to save him. Ning Xuema made a hand gesture to Kiran. Kiran raised his head and roared. His voice was long and drawn out, as if it was swaying down from the sky. The giant snakes and scorpions of the Snake and Scorpion Mountain all trembled and ran away in a split second. The 3 giant pythons besieging the young man also trembled a few times. They did not care about the young man's sword light and turned around to flee. In a split second they also disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuema patted Kiran's head. "Strange, didn't you roar so loudly that they did not dare to move? Why did they all run away? It's okay if the others ran away, but these 3 snakes cannot be scared away. You have to catch them. I want the snake gall." Chapter 325. Kiran raised its head and said, "Master, they are insects, not beasts. It is already good enough that I can scare them away. It is easy to get the snake gall. Wait for me." It ran away quickly, probably to find the 3 giant pythons. The young man staggered and turned around. He saw Ning Xuema in a light green dress and then looked at Kiran, who ran away. He was a little cautious and held his sword in front of his chest. Suddenly, his vision turned black and he fell down. The snake venom that he had been suppressing finally took effect. He did not faint yet. He struggled on the ground a few times and wanted to get up. However, his head was dizzy, and the wounds all over his body were numb and painful. He propped himself up halfway and then fell down again. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw the girl in the green dress walking over slowly. "What do you want to do?" He was even more cautious. Those who could come to the 5th peak were not easy to deal with. The girl in front of him looked less than 13 years old and was riding a Kiran. Was she a mountain spirit or a tree spirit? Ning Xuema looked at him with her arms crossed. Seeing that his face was as green as the grass under him, she smiled and said, "Are you afraid that I will eat you?" As she spoke, she had already squatted down and tore open his trousers. The young man was shocked and tried to stab her with his sword. "Don't touch me." He was poisoned, but his sword was still very strong. Ning Xuema extended her hand and grabbed his wrist. With a sweep of her palm, she directly knocked his sword out of his hand. Her pretty face was tense. "Don't use your psychokinesis again. Be careful of the snake venom." Her stern face had a murderous aura to it. The young man was stunned, and the palm that he was about to send out again paused. Who exactly are you?" "Someone who doesn't want you to die." Ning Xuema's reply was cold and indifferent, but her movements were exceptionally nimble. In the blink of an eye, she had already ripped open all of his clothes covering his wounds. She began to treat his wounds, squeezing out the poisonous blood and applying the snake venom medicine. The young man's face was almost completely red. He had many wounds on his arms, under his ribs, back, chest, calves, and even his upper thigh. If it was a man treating his wounds, he wouldn't feel anything, but the other party was a young girl. He could feel the other party's soft and warm hands moving and squeezing around his wound. That kind of touch caused an indescribable feeling to surge in his heart. You. He seemed to want to say something, but Ning Shuima knocked the back of his neck. Shut up. When she was practicing medicine, she hated it when her patients chatted with her. The young man finally shut his mouth and fainted. Ning Shuima glanced at him, and her eyes flashed with a touch of surprise. If an ordinary martial artist had been poisoned by such a deep snake venom, they would have already lost consciousness and foamed at the mouth. This young man was actually able to hold on until now without fainting. He could be considered a weirdo. Looking at his face that was 80% similar to number 2's, who was he to number 2? Younger brother? She dealt with the wounds quickly and professionally. After half an hour, the wounds on the youth's body had been cleaned up by her, and the places that needed to be bandaged were all bandaged up. This time she came here with a complete set of things. Bandages, antivenom, medicine. Everything was here. She had originally prepared them for herself, but she didn't expect to use most of them on this young man. Master, the snake gallbladders are here. Kirin rushed back like a whirlwind and brought back 3 snake gallbladders. Chapter 326. Ning Shuima looked at the 3 snake gallbladders, which were bigger than goose eggs, and her lips twitched. She had forgotten that the snakes were giant pythons. The young man was bitten by 3 giant pythons, so she had to give him some of the bile in the gallbladders. The young man was awakened by the bitter taste. He wanted to spit out the bitter taste in his mouth, but Ning Shuima pinched his chin and said, "Swallow it. It will save your life." The young man was slightly stunned, but he could only swallow it with his teeth clenched. After swallowing 2 mouthfuls, his throat was trembling because of the bitter taste. Finally, he finished 1 gallbladder. Before he could breathe a sigh of relief, the second gallbladder came close to his lips and said, "Here, there are 2 more." The young man was speechless. The young man finally finished the 3 gallbladders, and the snake venom was removed. His face turned green because of the bitter taste. However, the dizziness and nausea were alleviated. He turned over and wanted to get up, but he suddenly felt that his body was stiff. He looked down and saw bandages all over his body. He was tied up like a mummy. "All right, you're lucky to have your life back." Ning Shuima clapped her hands and stood up. She asked Kirin to get some water to wash her hands. The young man looked at her with his eyes wide open, and his expression was complicated. Why did you save me?" He did not know this girl, right? And on such a dangerous snake-scorpion peak, what was her goal? Ning Shuima glanced at him and said, "I saved you for fun. You can go down the mountain by yourself. I have something to do, so I won't accompany you." She patted Kirin's head and said, "Little apple, let's go." She still needed to pick herbs. The young man struggled on the ground and finally sat up. Because of the smell of Kirin, all the snakes and insects did not dare to come close. He gritted his teeth, picked up the sword that had fallen next to him and stood up stiffly. However, he had just been removed from the snake venom, and he had lost too much blood. After standing up, he felt dizzy. Finally, he could not support himself and fell to the ground again. "You can't move around casually now. It's better for you to rest for an hour. Don't worry, I've already asked Kirin to pee around. No snakes or insects will attack you." After saying that, Ning Shuima turned around and rode away on Kirin. The young man was stunned for a moment as he watched her leave. He closed his eyes slightly, took a deep breath, and began to regulate his breathing. He didn't want to die, he had to live on. He still had to pick the heavenly ice grass. After an unknown amount of time, the young man finally finished recuperating and regained some strength. He opened his eyes and was stunned for a moment. It was unknown when the green-clothed girl had returned. In her palm there was a faint blue grass that was trembling slightly. Heavenly ice grass. The young man's eyes lit up. He looked at the young girl. Didn't you risk your life to come here for this stalk of grass?" Ning Shuima said. Her voice was still indifferent. "I picked an extra stalk just now. I'll give it to you." That young man. He slowly reached out and took the stalk of grass. He gently placed it into his mouth and slowly ate it. He did not say the word thank you because it was too light. Ning Shuama took advantage of the time when the young man was meditating and left on Kiran. Since the young man could come here with a broken sword, it proved that he had extraordinary abilities. As long as the snake venom was removed, he would be able to leave the mountain alive. Master, do you know him? Kiran had been holding it in all the way. When they were about to reach the foot of the mountain, he finally could not hold it in anymore and asked. Chapter 327. Ning Shuama shook her head. I don't know him. She only saved him because she saw the face that resembled number 2's. This person is too much. You saved his life and gave him a stalk of grass. He didn't even say thank you. How rude. Kiran was a little angry. I don't have to ask for something in return for a favor. I don't need a thank you from him. He's much better than that red-clothed pervert. That guy was the real one who repaid kindness with ingratitude. Fortunately, he was tricked into the water by her. Speaking of which, was that pervert eaten by the monsters? He hasn't appeared for so many days. He should be dead, right? What a pity. Where did he hide that good zither? Ning Shuama shook her head and decided not to think about this annoying problem. She yawned and said, let's go. I'm sleepy. The matter of Ning Shuama subduing a Qilin had long been known by everyone. Therefore, recently, the little Qilin frequently appeared in the city in its original form. Aside from attracting people's attention, nothing else happened and no one dared to have any ideas about it. If they caught it, they would have to catch that jinx, Ning Shuama. Jinxes were the bane of people. This time, Ning Shuama was a little tired. She simply let Kiran carry her in its original form and run into the city. As expected, it attracted the attention of passers-by. Occasionally, the sound of discussion drifted into her ears. Is the one who just passed by Miss Ning? Yes, it's that jinx. Stay away from her. Don't get the bad luck. Yes. When we get home, we should wash off the bad luck. The two of them were in a heated discussion. Suddenly, there were two whooshing sounds in front of them. The two of them looked up and saw two black balls flying into their mouths. It smelled fishy. The two of them almost choked to death. They hurriedly pulled the balls out of their mouths. When they looked down, they vomited. What blocked their mouths were actually two balls of fresh donkey dung. A girl's laughter came from the front. Her laughter was like a silver bell swaying all the way. Master, good aim, Kiran praised. His little master didn't even look back. She just flicked the willow branch she was playing with on the ground, and the two balls of donkey dung automatically flew backward. Ning Shuama patted her small mouth and yawned. Of course, your little master was number 1 in hidden weapons that day. While they were speaking, they had already arrived at the city gates. Ning Shuama had just arrived when a group of soldiers suddenly gathered at the city gate. You're back. She's back. Ning Shuama frowned. She hadn't done anything wrong recently, had she? Why were the soldiers surrounding her? Just as she was about to ask, the crowd parted and a black-clothed bodyguard knelt down in front of her. Miss Ning, please save our crown prince. Ning Shuama. She had already recognized that person as Ji Yunhuang's personal bodyguard, whom she had met 2 or 3 times before. His name was Lei Lu. What happened to your crown prince? His Highness, he was seriously injured and his life is at stake. Ning Shuama raised her eyebrows and immediately said, let's go to the crown prince's residence. Lei Lu, tell me in detail how he got injured. The crown prince's residence, which used to be orderly and well-trained, was now in chaos. The crown prince's aides, civil and military officials, and even Lu Hin-ti were all gathered in the crown prince's residence. The imperial physicians in the palace and all the famous doctors in the capital were urgently summoned to the crown prince's residence. Chapter 328. Inside the crown prince's bedroom, Ji Yunhuang's face was as pale as a sheet. He was lying on the bed with his teeth clenched, not moving an inch. A doctor was trembling in fear as he examined him. Lu Hin-ti's face was as calm as water as he paced back and forth in the main hall. Oppressive and oppressive, that invisible pressure made everyone unable to breathe. In the corner of the main hall, there was a row of doctors kneeling like quails. All of them had their heads lowered as they were so nervous that they were sweating profusely. After a while, The doctor who was examining the crown prince also knelt down. Your Majesty. Lu Hinti anxiously asked, how is it? The doctor's lips trembled. Your Majesty, the crown prince's heart was injured. This official is also powerless. Trash. Lu Hinti slammed his palm on the table. What did I raise all of you for? If anything happens to the crown prince, I will bury all of you trash with him. That doctor also trembled as he knelt down with the other doctors. Cough. Ji Yunhuang, who had been standing straight and motionless, suddenly trembled. A gurgling sound came from his throat. He suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. Your Highness. Huang brother. In a flurry they wiped away Ji Yunhuang's blood and cleaned him up. Yunyao, who had been standing at the side, looked at Ji Yunhuang, whose face was as white as a sheet, and cried out, Brother, you must hold on. Wu, if anything happens to you, I don't want to live anymore. Shut up. Lu Hinti became even more anxious when he saw her crying. You still have the face to cry here? If it wasn't for your brother saving you, how could he be injured like this? Shut up, don't disturb him anymore. Ji Yunyao's body trembled as she resisted the urge to cry. Tears flowed down her face. Your Majesty, Divine Dr. Mo has arrived. A eunuch hurriedly came to report. Lu Hinti's eyes lit up as if he had finally grasped onto a life-saving straw. Quickly invite him in. Quickly invite him in. Divine Dr. Mo was a young man who looked to be around 30 years old. He was handsome and refined. On this continent, there was no one who did not know of Divine Dr. Mo's name. No one knew who his master was. They only knew that his medical skills were extremely brilliant. He could bring the dead back to life and heal bones. It was unknown how many people on the verge of death had been brought back to life by his miraculous hands. No matter where this person went, he would be treated as a guest of honor. Even the royal families of the 5 countries treated him differently. This person was indeed unique when it came to treating illnesses, but his temper was also strange. He was extremely arrogant and would not allow anyone to question him. Once he was questioned, he would definitely leave. Therefore, everyone who invited him treated him with respect and treated his judgment as an imperial edict. Upon hearing his arrival, not only did Lu Hinti have hope, even the row of doctors who were kneeling quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Lu Hinti led the civil and military officials who had been waiting outside to welcome Divine Dr. Mo in. Ji Yunyao's eyes widened as she stared unblinkingly at Divine Dr. Mo walking to the bed to treat Ji Yunhuang. She did not even dare to breathe loudly. Lu Hinti also held his breath. This was their last hope. Divine Dr. Mo's eyebrows wrinkled even tighter. Lu Hinti and the rest also stared at his expression. Seeing his frown, their hearts also seemed to tighten. After a moment, Divine Dr. Mo finally let go of Ji Yunhuang's wrist and slowly stood up. Chapter 329. Divine Dr. Mo, how is he? Can he be saved? Lu Hinti bluntly asked. Divine Dr. Mo's voice was flat. His heart was injured by the heavenly star sex blue star saber. The blue star saber also had the soul-breaking parasite. Now the parasite has entered his 8 extra meridians and his heart is on the verge of breaking. If it wasn't for the fact that the Crown Prince's psychokinesis had reached Earth rank level 3, he would have been dead by now. Yes. Divine Dr. Mo, you're right. My brother was plotted against by the Heavenly Star Sect. Since Divine Dr. Mo can see through his injury, you must be able to cure him, right? Ji Yunyao's eyes sparkled, full of hope. Divine Dr. Mo shook his head and was about to speak when the guard outside reported. Reporting to the Emperor, Miss Ning from the Marquis Jingyuan estate has arrived. Lu Hinti subconsciously frowned. What is she doing here? Ji Yunyao was even more furious. What is this jinx doing here? If not for her, my brother wouldn't be able to endure such a heavy injury. Reporting to the Emperor, Miss Ning said that she can treat His Highness. The guard outside reported. Lu Hinti was startled. Divine Dr. Mo sneered, what a big tone. Even I don't have full confidence in treating him. How can she treat him? Ji Yunyao snorted. How can that slut have such ability? She's just playing to the gallery. Wait for your daughter to beat her up. She turned around and ran out. Lu Hinti did not stop her. His eyes stared at Divine Dr. Mo's face. Since Divine Dr. Mo knows about the illness, You must have a way to treat my son? Divine Dr. Mo nodded proudly. I can save his life, but the parasite has already spread to his 8 extra meridians. His Highness martial arts can be considered as completely crippled. What? Lu Hinti's face changed greatly. Divine Dr. Mo was not finished. Not only will his martial arts be crippled, I'm afraid that he won't be able to walk or even sit up and take care of himself. In other words, Ji Yunhuang would be paralyzed in bed for the rest of his life. He couldn't even take care of himself. What was the difference between being alive and being dead? Lu Hinti's face turned pale. This was the son he was most proud of. If this was the result, Divine Dr. Mo, is there any other way? As long as I can make him better, no matter what you need, I will try my best to do it. Your Majesty, even if you pluck the ginseng fruit from the heavens, His Highness the Crown Prince can only do so. This is already the best outcome for him. Lu Hinti's body swayed, his heart filled with despair. The head steward leaned over and whispered into his ear, Your Majesty, just now the Imperial Guard said that Miss Ning seems to be able to treat the Crown Prince's injury. Why don't we let her in to take a look? I heard that Miss Ning had once reattached a severed arm and restored that person's severed arm back to normal. Lu Hinti's mind moved, but before he could say anything, Divine Dr. Mo sneered. His Majesty would believe a silly little girl? Lu Hinti choked. He wanted to ask someone to invite Ning Shuama back, but he was afraid that Ning Shuama wouldn't be able to treat him. Instead, he would offend Divine Dr. Mo and lose his paralyzed son. Divine Dr. Mo immediately saw through his worries. He sneered, Your Majesty, there is no harm in letting her in to take a look. Let this commoner see if she has any miraculous tricks up her sleeves. Lu Hinti knew that Divine Dr. Mo was ridiculing him, but at this time, his son's life was more important. Lu Hinti was in a dilemma. He, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, was slightly hesitant. He held on to the mentality that with one more person, there would be more hope. He immediately decided to go with the flow and summon Ning Shuama. Chapter 330. Lu Hinti smiled apologetically at Divine Dr. Mo, then let her come in and take a look. She may not have any methods, but to be able to consult Divine Dr. Mo is a rare opportunity for her. She still has some medical skills. Come, invite Miss Ning in. Divine Dr. Mo sneered as he casually sat down on a chair. He wanted to see who exactly was this person who dared to boast so arrogantly. Outside the Crown Prince's residence, Ning Shuama stood there with her arms crossed, coldly confronting Ji Yunya. On the way here, she had already asked Imperial bodyguard Lei Lu about the general situation. However, the matter of Ji Yunyao framing Lususu was exposed, and the people of Heavenly Star Sect knew the ins and outs of the matter. The sect leader of the Heavenly Star Sect was furious, and sent a disciple to demand an explanation from Lu Hinti. Recently, Lu Hinti's children had been in trouble one after another. He had just beaten up his son and demoted him to a commoner. Before he could call him back, his daughter had created such a big mess. This gave him a headache. He was so angry that he called his daughter into the palace and reprimanded her. He stripped her of her princess title and demoted her to a princess. He ordered her to reflect on her mistakes in the princess's residence. His punishment was obviously too light, so the Heavenly Star Sect disciples were naturally dissatisfied. They found a disciple from the Opportunity Sect to sneak into the princess's residence and kidnap Ji Yunyao. That day, Ji Yunhuang accompanied Ning Shuama to the tea house to drink wine. He was called away by the princess's maid because of the princess's disappearance. Ji Yunhuang investigated carefully and found out that it was the Heavenly Star Sect who kidnapped his sister. He was afraid that Ji Yunyao would be at a disadvantage, so he brought people to chase after them. Lei Lu was also one of the people he brought along. The Heavenly Star Sect is also a famous sect on this continent, and there are many experts inside. Ji Yunhuang spent a lot of effort to find Ji Yunyao. When he was escaping with her, he met the sect leader of the Heavenly Star Sect who was returning to the mountain. After a fight, Ji Yunhuang was injured by the sect leader. Lei Lu and the others risked their lives to rescue him and retreated to the capital. Ning Shuama also understood Ji Yunhuang's current symptoms from Lei Lu's description. She also had a general idea. He had even planned out the treatment plan in his heart. But she didn't expect to run into Ji Yunyao at the entrance of the Crown Prince's residence. When Ji Yunyao saw her, it was as if she had met her enemy. Her eyes burned with hatred. Immediately, he began to curse her, calling her jinx, scourge, slut, and clamoring for her to get lost. The commotion in front of the Crown Prince's residence naturally attracted a large crowd of onlookers. Usually, this princess always put on airs. Today, people finally saw the princess's scolding skills. She was simply comparable to the butcher's wife in the market. No one dared to intervene in the affairs of the royal family, and no one dared to stand up for this injustice. Therefore, when people heard her scolding fiercely, although they felt indignant, no one dared to say anything. They all looked at Ning Shuama sympathetically, thinking that this seemingly weak girl would cry after being scolded. She didn't expect that Ning Shuama would sit there with her arms crossed and listen. After hearing Ji Yunyao's scolding, her lips curved into a smile. She sized Ji Yunyao up from head to toe before unhurriedly saying, "Is this really a princess? Is it some shrew pretending to be her?" Someone in the crowd laughed. This little girl's counterattack was good. Ji Yunyao's face immediately turned red. "You slut." She raised her hand and was about to teach Ning Shuama a lesson. Chapter 331. She raised her hand and was about to teach Ning Shuama a lesson, but Ning Shuama's words stopped her in her tracks. "If you want to lose a few more teeth, then come and try." Ji Yunyao immediately thought of the embarrassment Ning Shuama gave her at Heavenly Book Mountain. If Ji Yunhuang had not arrived in time, she was afraid that she would have suffered even more under Ning Shuama's hands. Ning Shuama coldly said, "Ji Yunyao, let me ask you, who told you to stop me? Was it His Majesty?" Ji Yunyao choked. That's right. Imperial Father also doesn't want a jinx like you to enter the Crown Prince's residence, so as to avoid being tainted by your bad luck. Alright, since it was His Majesty's intention, then there was no need for her to go in and ask for a rebuff. Ning Shuama faintly smiled and nodded. "Very good. You're the one who said it." She then nodded at Lei Lu. "Lei Lu, I can indeed treat your Crown Prince's injuries, but since the imperial family doesn't allow me to enter the residence, then I can't help. Goodbye." She turned and left. She was not a saint and did not have the heart of a doctor. The reason why she came here was because of Ji Yunhuang's kindness. In her heart, she also saw Ji Yunhuang as a friend. Therefore, she did not care about the past and immediately came here. However, the old emperor and princess clearly did not believe her and humiliated her like this. Why should she shamelessly go up and treat them? Lei Lu became anxious and knelt down again. "Miss Ning, please stay for a moment. This subordinate will personally report to His Majesty." Ji Yunyao was also stunned, but she was still unconvinced. Her small mouth twitched as she said, "Why would I beg this slut? My brother has divine Dr. Mo to treat him. Why would he need this jinx's three-legged cat's medical skills?" Lei Lu suddenly turned his head and did not care about seniority. He said in a low voice, "Princess, please speak with dignity. His Highness was injured because he wanted to save you. If you miss this opportunity and something happens to the Crown Prince, I'm afraid you will regret it for the rest of your life." Ji Yunyao's expression changed. She raised her hand and gave Lei Lu a resounding slap. "Who do you think you are? You dare to teach me a lesson?" Lei Lu stood there with his back straight. "Princess, Lei Lu's lowly life is not important. His Highness the Crown Prince's injuries are the most important. Even if you beat Lei Lu to death, Lei Lu will still invite Miss Ning in. You're rebelling." With the princess's authority being offended, Ji Yunyao simply flew into a rage. "You actually dare to go against my words." As soon as she raised her hand, she wanted to give Lei Lu a few consecutive slaps. However, before she could do so, someone grabbed her wrist. Ning Shuama's cold voice sounded in her ear. "He is the Crown Prince's loyal guard. He is an iron-blooded man. How can someone like you be qualified to teach him a lesson?" Ning Shuama's hand was as fast as lightning. Ji Yunyao was not prepared at all, and her wrist was immediately grabbed by her. Ji Yunyao's entire body immediately went numb, unable to exert even the slightest bit of strength. Ning Shuama casually flung her away, causing her to stagger and almost hit her head on the door of the Crown Prince's residence. There were other guards of the Crown Prince's residence at the door, but at this moment, they also looked down on Ji Yunyao's arrogance. Seeing that she was at a disadvantage, they all turned a blind eye and pretended not to see. Lei Lu looked at Ning Xuema and his heart was moved. Such a delicate little girl, who had already been treated unfairly, was actually willing to stand up for a servant like him. What was even rarer was her imposing manner. Once she was serious, it was actually full of power. Compared to a real princess like Ji Yunyao, she had more style. Chapter 332. This kind of girl was simply like a luminous object, unknowingly attracting everyone's attention. While the entrance was in a mess, a small eunuch rushed out and loudly announced, "His Majesty has decreed that Miss Ning should quickly enter." Since the emperor had personally passed down the decree, no one dared to stop her. Lei Lu sighed in relief and bowed towards Ning Xuema. "Miss Ning, please enter." Ning Xuema did not even look at the pale Ji Yunyao and stepped inside. Ji Yunhuang's injury was more important. She did not have time to bicker with this shrew princess. There would be another time to teach her a lesson. Ning Xuema finally entered the crown prince's palace and finally saw Ji Yunhuang. Of course, she also saw the large room full of people inside. Divine Dr. Mo had been active in Chongkong country for the past few days, so he had naturally heard of Ning Xuema's reputation as a trash and a jinx. His heart was filled with disdain and curiosity towards her. At this moment, when he saw Ning Xuema enter, he sneered slightly. So it turned out to be this little girl who was still a fetus. Sure enough, she was too young and did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. She had not even seen the patient, and yet she dared to boast that she could cure Ji Yunhuang's injury. It must be because her reputation was too bad, and she wanted to use this opportunity to make a comeback. She was going to slap her in a while. Ning Xuema naturally saw this divine Dr. Mo. She had also heard of his reputation before, but she did not expect him to be so young. According to the information she had obtained, this divine Dr. Mo was at least 50 years old. He had been famous for 30 years. To be able to maintain his appearance, it seemed like his psychokinesis was not weak. At this moment, this divine Dr. Mo raised his head slightly and looked at her with a condescending gaze with a face full of disdain. Looking at his expression, she knew what he was thinking. Her lips curled up slightly and she did not look at him anymore. She directly walked towards Ji Yunhuang's bedside. "Excuse me, please move aside." Divine Dr. Mo was intentionally blocking Ji Yunhuang's bedside, but when he heard Ning Xuema's words, the veins on his forehead jumped. This little girl was not old, but she had such an arrogant tone. "You said you can cure the crown prince's injury?" He did not have the intention to move aside and spoke in a deep voice. "Not bad." Ning Xuema answered succinctly. She finally looked at him and said bluntly, "Since you can't treat me, don't stand here and block the way." Divine Dr. Mo's handsome face turned slightly red. After so many years, this was the first time someone dared to speak to him like this. "How do you know I can't treat him?" Divine Dr. Mo's voice turned cold. Ning Xuema crossed her arms. "Do you even need to guess? If you could treat him, would His Majesty have invited me in?" Divine Dr. Mo. She was indeed a smart girl. He had yet to see how good his medical skills were, but this instantaneous deduction ability made him look at him in a new light. Lu Hinti also felt a little uncomfortable. He coughed and said, "Ning Xuema, don't be rude in front of Mr. Mo. Look at Huang Er first." As long as there was a sliver of hope, he wanted to grasp it at all costs. Divine Dr. Mo sneered again. He moved to the side and said coldly, "Good, you see. I'd like to see what a little girl like you can see." He was waiting to see this little girl make a fool of herself. Ning Xuema took a few steps forward and checked Ji Yunhuang's condition. Her movements were quick and nimble. She was very familiar with the 4 ways of looking, listening, questioning, and feeling the pulse, but it was different from the methods of the doctors in this era. Chapter 333. Furthermore, she had her own set of Western medicine diagnosis, causing all the doctors in the room to be even more confused. Divine Dr. Mo was also looking at her. Although he still felt disdain towards Ning Xuema, he still had medical ethics. He knew that when a doctor was treating a patient, he should avoid talking and disturbing them. Ji Yunyao had also entered the room unknowingly. When she saw that everyone's gaze was focused on Ning Xuema, the hatred in her heart increased by another level. She first looked at the other doctors' expressions and saw that some of them were surprised, some were disdainful, some were puzzled, and some were confused. She then knew that there was a problem with Ning Xuema's diagnosis method. She could not help but sneer. Why are you pretending to be an expert? How can a good-for-nothing jinx diagnose an illness that divine Dr. Mo can't? Don't let others laugh at you. Shut up. Two people spoke at the same time. One was Lu Hinti and the other was actually divine Dr. Mo. When the two of them spoke at the same time, Junyao was shocked. She shut her mouth and looked at one person, then looked at the other. She felt wronged. Imperial father. Lu Hinti simply had a headache because of this daughter of his. His face was as calm as water. Don't make noise. Your brother's injury is more important. Divine Dr. Mo's tone was also cold. When a doctor is treating a patient, the surroundings are not allowed to make noise. Don't you know this? Ji Yunyao bit her lips hatefully and finally didn't open her mouth to speak again. After a moment, Ning Xuema stood up. She already had an idea in her heart. Ji Yunhuang's injury looked extremely dangerous, but he wouldn't die in a short period of time. How is it? Lu Hinti couldn't help but ask. Ning Xuema's small face was expressionless. Her gaze landed on divine Dr. Mo. What did divine Dr. Mo say? Divine Dr. Mo sneered. You were so confident just now. Don't tell me you didn't even see the illness. Actually, he was also certain that Ning Xuema did not notice anything wrong with Ji Yunhuang's wound. At first glance, it looked no different from an ordinary knife wound. All the doctors present did not notice anything wrong with Ji Yunhuang. They all thought that Ji Yunhuang's heart was injured. Ning Xuema smiled. She was beautiful to begin with. Her smile was like a clear light that seemed to brighten up the entire bedroom. The illness isn't complicated. The crown prince's left ventricle was cut by a knife. The knife's aura cut the left ventricle. As expected, she thought that it was just a knife wound. However, it was already considered pretty good that she was able to identify the specific part of Ji Yunhuang's injury. It seemed that this little girl's medical skills were remarkable. Divine Dr. Mo sneered and pointed his nose at Ning Xuema, and Ning Xuema smiled leisurely. Also, there was a goo poison on the saber. Now the poison has already flowed into his 8 extraordinary meridians. The goo worm has already entered his heart, in the right atrium. Divine Dr. Mo stiffened, and his face changed. This little girl actually had such sharp eyes. He actually knew more than him and in more detail. Could it be that someone told her in advance? Divine Dr. Mo's gaze landed on the little eunuch who delivered the decree. When he told Lu Hinti about the illness, this little eunuch was in the room. Ning Xuema smiled again. The goo poison has already rushed to the Ran and Du meridians. She said a lot of professional terms and finally concluded, if we use ordinary methods to treat him, at most we can save his life. However, his martial arts will be completely crippled. He might even be paralyzed in bed for the rest of his life, unable to take care of himself. After hearing this, divine Dr. Mo's face completely changed. Ning Xuema's statement was almost the same as what he said to the emperor. Chapter 334. Ning Xuema's statement was almost the same as what he said to the emperor. When he said this to the emperor, the eunuch had already left. She really saw through it. She was not opportunistic and did not follow the crowd. Ji Yunyao's face changed and she could not help but shout, nonsense. My brother will not be paralyzed in bed. You jinx, don't talk nonsense. Ning Xuema's face tensed up. She glanced at her and crossed her arms. She looked at Lu Hinti with a smile that was not a smile. Then pretend that I didn't say anything. Lu Hinti had been listening attentively. He was already in despair about his son's condition, but after hearing Ning Xuema's words, it seemed that there was still hope. Hearing her words, he hurriedly said, Xuema, do you have other unusual methods? Ning Xuema smiled lazily. Of course I do. If you use my method, not only can the crown prince keep his life, he can also continue to practice martial arts. However, he will need to rest in bed for a month. When she said this, Lu Hinti's eyes lit up. Divine Dr. Mo could not help but widen his eyes. He looked at Ning Xuema and did not believe her at all. Impossible. Once the parasite enters the Ran and Du meridians, it cannot be removed. Moreover, The heart meridians that were injured by the knife will not be as good as before. Even if he can recover his ability to walk, his heart will beat like thunder after 2 steps. If he moves too vigorously, his heart meridians will break. He will still die. Ning Shuima pursed her lips. I said, if it is the ordinary method, the result will be like this. Then what is your special method? Divine Dr. Mo's interest was piqued. I will tell you when necessary. Ning Shuima said lightly and looked at Lu Hinti again. Your Majesty may not believe me? Then I will ask Divine Dr. Mo to treat him. Shuima will take her leave now. Shuima. Lu Hinti finally caught a glimmer of hope. How could he let her go? He even took a step forward and stood in front of Ning Shuima. Shuima, what are the chances of your special method succeeding? What's the worst that could happen? I'm 70 to 80% sure. Ning Shuima answered straightforwardly. The worst case scenario is that he can't keep his kung fu and can't use his kung fu anymore. However, he can still do normal activities. Even the worst outcome was much better than Divine Dr. Mo's best outcome. Lu Hinti's eyes lit up even more. He didn't care if he would offend Divine Dr. Mo. He almost forgot himself and grabbed Ning Shuima's hand. Shuima, then I'll leave Huang to you. You have to try your best to save him. He treats you well. Ning Shuima took a step back. Shuima will do her best. But Shuima has her own conditions. What conditions? I'll promise you anything. Lu Hinti blurted out. Ji Yunyao's expression changed. If Ning Shuima's condition was to be the crown prince's consort, then she immediately sneered at the side. Father, she's just a 13-year-old girl. How could she have better skills than Divine Dr. Mo? Don't listen to her boasting. She's a jinx. If it wasn't for her, brother Crown Prince wouldn't be like this. If she randomly asks for conditions and enters our imperial family. Her words reminded Lu Hinti. His expression changed slightly and he regretted saying too much. If Ning Shuima really asked to be the Crown Prince's consort, then should he agree or not? When the ancestor left that day, he said, 1,000-year lone phoenix will cause chaos in the world. He naturally believed the ancestor's words without any doubt. Chapter 335. If she were to marry the crown prince, not only would she cause Ji Yunhuang's death, she would also cause the destruction of Chongkong Empire. Chuma, what are your conditions? I will try my best to satisfy you. His words were much more tactful. Ning Shuima was extremely intelligent, so how could she not know what this father and daughter pair were thinking? The corner of her lips slightly curved, but it was unknown whether it was mockery or ridicule. Your Majesty, don't worry. I am not interested in the crown princess. Your Majesty will definitely be able to fulfill Shuima's conditions. Lu Hinti finally let out a sigh of relief. All right, speak. Ning Shuima's gaze fell on Ji Yunyao's body. Ji Yunyao's body inexplicably turned cold, as if she was being stared at by a ferocious beast. She couldn't help but take a step back. Why are you looking at me? Ning Shuima's lips curved again, causing Ji Yunyao to be even more alarmed when she saw her smile. A bad feeling welled up in her heart, as if she was going to be in big trouble. This time her intuition was not bad. Ning Shuima really opened her mouth. Your Majesty, the princess has repeatedly attacked Shuima for no reason. Shuima almost died in her hands several times. Now, Shuima is very unhappy whenever she sees her. Lu Hinti immediately said, I will immediately have her get lost. He gave Ji Yunyao a look. Why aren't you getting lost? Ji Yunyao also knew that this was not the time to argue. Although she was angry, she still wanted to leave. Ning Shuima sneered. So this is how your Majesty promised Shuima? That's very good. She said the last 3 words very slowly and heavily. Lu Hinti's heart skipped a beat, but he could only say, then Shuima, what are your conditions? The princess's mouth is very poisonous, making people feel suffocated. Shuima thinks that your Majesty should teach her a lesson. Ning Shuima said the first step. Lu Hinti gritted his teeth. Shuima, you're right. This child really needs to be taught a lesson. Guards, drag the princess down and give her 30 slaps. It was definitely an extremely shameful thing for a princess of the royal family to be slapped. What's more, the person's palms were as hard as iron palms. 1 slap was enough to make one's face red, and 2 slaps was enough to knock out a tooth. Ji Yunyao usually liked to slap people, but she liked to slap other people. She loved to use this punishment on women who offended her or her palace mates once they made a mistake. She felt inexplicably good when she saw that person being slapped into a pig's head. In her entire life she had slapped countless people. Moreover, every time someone was beaten into a pig's head, she would order people to parade them through the streets, humiliating them as much as she could. Many of the women who had been dealt with by her in this way were ashamed and angry, and many of them committed suicide. And now, it was finally her turn to be slapped. When she thought of the person's swollen and purple face, Ji Yunyao was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She jumped up. Imperial father, don't listen to this slut's nonsense. 60. Ning Shuama coldly spat out 2 words. Slut, what did you say? 90. Lu Hinti was about to be defeated by his stupid daughter. He immediately said, guards, drag the princess down and give her 90 slaps. With a flick of his finger, he sealed Ji Yunyao's stupid retort to prevent the number of slaps from increasing. 2 eunuchs received the emperor's signal and came over to drag Ji Yunyao away. Unexpectedly, Ning Shuama was not finished. Your Majesty, the princess is the most honorable girl in the world. She should be virtuous, benevolent, and have a noble temperament. Princess Ji Yunyao obviously does not meet this requirement. In order to avoid being laughed at by the world, her princess title should be revoked and never be restored. Chapter 336. Some people just don't learn from their mistakes. If I don't teach her a real lesson, she won't understand that there are some people who can't be provoked. She had already offended this princess. Regardless of whether she tolerated it or not, this princess would still plot against her. Naturally, she wouldn't be polite. A drowning dog needs to be beaten up. It's best to beat it to death in one breath, so that it won't bite again. Lu Hinti was stunned. He looked at his daughter whose face was already pale, then looked at his son who was lying on the bed with only 1 breath left. He steeled his heart and said, all right, I promise you. Ji Yunyao's body swayed. She didn't expect that she would end up like this today. Her pair of fiery eyes looked at Ning Shuama, but she couldn't say anything. Even if she could, she finally understood that she couldn't say anything. If she said anything, she would only be humiliating herself. She had been arrogant and despotic for so many years. Today she finally kicked an iron plate that broke her bones. She wanted revenge. Once she gained power in the future, she would definitely take revenge. She would let this stinky girl live a life worse than death. Ning Shuama, we have already promised you. Can you treat Huang'er now? Lu Hinti's tone was already somewhat unpleasant. Ning Shuama remained unmoved. She raised her head and smiled faintly. Your Majesty, I haven't finished stating my conditions. There's still more. Lu Hinti simply wanted to gnash his teeth, but at this time he couldn't offend this little girl. Even if he wanted to find an opportunity to punish her and teach her a big lesson, or even kill her to silence her, he had to wait until Ji Yunhuang recovered. Right now, he could only follow her wishes. Shuama, what conditions do you have? Just say it directly. Lu Hinti didn't want to bargain with her anymore. His son's injury didn't wait for anyone. Your Majesty is still the most straightforward. Ning Shuama clapped her hands. She was the best at reading people's minds. Lu Hinti's little scheme couldn't escape her eyes. Thus, she very straightforwardly stated her conditions. First, slap Ji Yunyao 90 times, and strip her of her title of princess, never to be reinstated. Secondly, Shuama had to decide her own marriage. His Majesty could no longer grant another marriage for Shuama. Thirdly, His Majesty had to swear to Shuama that he would not retaliate against Shuama in any way, whether now or in the future, including inciting the officials. Of course, this includes Princess Yunyao as well. If the oath is violated, then the ruler of vast sky empire will change hands, and the descendants of the Ji clan will never be able to hold their heads high. Everyone's expression changed when they heard the last line of exits. Even Lu Hinti's face darkened. Ning Shuama, how dare you? Treacherous. How disgraceful. Ning Shuama, how dare you? Is he crazy? All the ministers present began to reprimand him. This girl was simply crazy. He actually forced the emperor to swear an oath. Moreover, she had to swear such a treacherous oath. This was truly the first time since the beginning of time. Ning Shuama, Do you know that based on what you just said, I can exterminate your entire clan? Lu Hinti's body emitted a cold pressure that made everyone tremble. Exterminate her entire clan? Even if you exterminate the entire Ning clan, what does it have to do with her? Ning Shuama secretly mocked him in her heart. Even if the entire Ning clan was exterminated, she would not care. Ning Shuama calmly raised her head, as if she did not see Lu Hinti's terrifying aura. Your Majesty, could it be that you want to take revenge on Shuama for today's matter? Of course not. Lu Hinti naturally would not admit it. That's right. Since your Majesty does not have the intention to harm Shuama, why should you be afraid of swearing an oath? Chapter 337. That's it. Since your Majesty has no intention of harming Shuama, why should you be afraid of making an oath? Shuama is an orphan girl. When she is in danger, no one can support Shuama. Shuama can only protect herself. If your Majesty doesn't even give Shuama this kind of promise, even if your Majesty is benevolent and righteous and won't harm Shuama, it's hard to guarantee that others will harm Shuama in order to curry favor with your Majesty. Therefore, we can only rely on your Majesty to issue an edict to restrain the subjects. If your Majesty agrees to this condition, Shuama will naturally risk her life to save His Highness the Crown Prince. If you don't agree, then Shuama's future will be worrying. Even if Shuama is willing to save His Highness the Crown Prince, I'm afraid that she will feel uneasy. Once there is a mistake, Shuama's cheap life is nothing. But if something bad happens to His Highness the Crown Prince, Lu Hinti. Ning Shuama's words were reasonable and he couldn't refute it for a while. Moreover, the little girl was obviously going all out. If he forced her, it would be useless. In the end, Aiko's life was more important. Lu Hinti secretly gritted his teeth and agreed. Of course, he also said some high-sounding words. For example, he naturally kept his words. For Marquis Ning's face, he will give you a promise and so on. Finally, according to Ning Shuama's words, he made an oath in front of all the officials. Once he made an oath, he would be under the supervision of God. It also involved the fate of the country. Lu Hinti wouldn't dare to violate it, even if he was beaten to death. After he made the oath in order to restrain the officials, he also said some ruthless words. For example, whoever violates my oath and seeks revenge on Ning Shuama will be killed without mercy. These words were said while looking at Ji Yunyao. His voice and expression were stern. He directly broke up Ji Yunyao's plan of revenge by force in the future. Although Ji Yunyao was very unwilling, she didn't dare to go against her imperial father on this matter. She glared at Ning Shuama, her eyes almost spitting fire. Ning Shuama responded with a faint smile, and then bowed deeply to Lu Hinti. Your Majesty, you can even agree to such a harsh condition as Shuama. You can even do this for the orphan daughter of a meritorious official. It can be seen that your Majesty's benevolence is unparalleled. You are a famous emperor throughout the ages. Shuama admires you. At this time, she had to flatter Lu Hinti and appease his heart that was about to explode. She had to save his face and give him a way out so that she could be safer. Her words were so sincere that Lu Hinti finally regained some of his dignity. His cold face finally showed signs of thawing. He nodded and said, "Can you start now?" Ning Shuama nodded. Of course. But I still need your Majesty to prepare an extremely clean room as soon as possible, a medical officer to assist me, and 2 sets of thoroughly disinfected white robes. She listed a few more conditions in one breath. Lu Hinti agreed to them one by one. No matter what the imperial family prepared, they were incomparably fast. In less than half an hour, all the facilities that Ning Shuama requested were ready. Only the medical officer was left. Lu Hinti didn't know what kind of person she needed, so he let her choose among the kneeling medical officers. Ning Shuama wasn't polite. She tilted her head and looked at the few of them. Just as she was about to choose one that looked nimble, Divine Dr. Mo, who had been watching from the sidelines, suddenly said, "This commoner is willing to assist this young lady." Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Chapter 338. What kind of person was Divine Dr. Mo? Even if a prince wanted to be his assistant, he would still reject the most awesome divine doctor without any hesitation. A person who did not put anyone in his eyes was actually willing to be the assistant of a little girl. This time, regardless of whether Ning Shuama succeeded or not, just based on this point alone, her name would spread far and wide. Lu Hinti could not ask for anything more. Just as he was about to agree, Ning Shuama tilted her head and looked at Divine Dr. Mo. I need someone who is extremely nimble. This was the first time Divine Dr. Mo was suspected of not being nimble. He was simply furious and proudly said, my hands and feet are more nimble than any of the doctors here. Ning Shuama smiled. The reason why Divine Dr. Mo is willing to lower himself to be Shuama's assistant is because he wants to see how Shuama will treat him, right? Divine Dr. Mo's thoughts were seen through by her words. He was startled for a moment and his face turned red. Could it be that you don't want others to see your treatment methods? Ning Shuama shook her head. It doesn't matter. I'm not afraid of people stealing my medical methods. Since Divine Dr. Mo volunteered himself, Shuama could not ask for anything more. This matter was settled just like that. While the imperial family was preparing those things, Ning Shuama first watched Jin Yao being slapped. With her leisurely supervising from the side, the two women who were administering the punishment did not dare to let go. The slaps were especially crisp and clear. After 90 slaps, not to mention that Ji Yunyao's face was already swollen beyond recognition. After watching the punishment, Ning Shuama quickly went to disinfect herself. She needed to operate on Ji Yunhuang, so her body had to be thoroughly disinfected as well. An hour later, Ning Shuama was about to enter the cleansing room. Lu Hinti couldn't hold it in any longer and asked, Ning Shuama, as far as we know, Huang Er's kindness to you can be said to be as heavy as a mountain. Your relationship with him is also very good. If we don't agree to your conditions, will you really not treat him? Ning Shuama tilted her head to look at him and smiled. Even if your majesty doesn't agree, Shuama will still treat him. But fortunately, his majesty is incomparably benevolent and has agreed. Lu Hinti. Ning Shuama smiled and entered. Your majesty, please wait for my good news. Shuama wants absolute silence. While I'm treating the crown prince, your majesty is not allowed to enter the room no matter what you hear. You're not allowed to send anyone to disturb me. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. Lu Hinti naturally agreed to this condition. He immediately ordered that no one was allowed to disturb Ning Shuama before she came out and no one was allowed to make any noise. To be on the safe side, Lu Hinti stationed elite soldiers outside the cleansing room. These elite soldiers were very nimble and walked very lightly. Not only did they guard the room like an iron bucket, but they also didn't make any noise that would disturb the people inside. Lu Hinti didn't leave either. He led the officials to personally sit in the Crown Prince's mansion's living room and quietly waited for the good news. As for the little Qilin, it contributed another Qilin scale. At this moment, it transformed into a blue cat and obeyed Ning Shuama's instructions. Bored, it rested on an armchair. In just a few days it had already lost 2 scales. It needed to recuperate well to slowly recover. Master had already promised to buy it ginseng after this matter was settled. Lu Hinti naturally noticed it. As an emperor, his information channels were naturally sensitive enough. He knew that the big blue cat in front of him was actually a Kirin beast. Kirins were auspicious beasts. If they could persuade it to return to the imperial family, then vast Sky Empire would have a greater say in this continent. Chapter 339. If they wanted to unify the country in the future, they could use it to rally the people of other countries. Kirin, how do you know Shuama? Lu Hinti began to chat with it. Kirin yawned lazily. It was a rather proud mythological beast. Other than its master and... who was it again? Kirin felt that it seemed to know someone, but it couldn't remember at the moment. It seemed that some part of its memory had been erased. Well, since it couldn't remember, it wouldn't think about it. Anyway, it only listened to its little master. As for other people, it couldn't be bothered. Therefore, it didn't even bother to open its eyes. It continued to bury its head and rest. Lu Hinti was rebuffed. Hey Kirin, His Majesty is the true dragon, the son of heaven. Even if you're a mythological beast, you still have to listen to the words of the true dragon, the son of heaven. An official couldn't help but speak up. The true dragon, the son of heaven? The whiskers on the side of the little blue cat's mouth curled up. It was just a title that the human emperor gave himself. Did it really think that he was a dragon? Dragons were noble mythological beasts. They didn't want to be the emperor of the human world. Besides, Kirins and dragons were on par. Even a true dragon couldn't be above a Kirin, let alone a dragon that humans gave themselves. At most, the emperors of the human world had the aura of a dragon bestowed by the heavens. They also had to rely on the power of the mountains and rivers. For example, their ancestors were buried in the dragon's den. It was a real mythological beast, Kirin. The fake dragon emperor of the human world was nothing. The little blue cat snorted. It wasn't clear whether it was mocking or disdainful, but it continued to lie there and sleep. Lu Hinti was a little embarrassed. It was the first time that he had been ignored so thoroughly. The officials saw that he didn't look too good. One of them hurriedly tried to smooth things over. Your Majesty, perhaps this is just a cat and not a Kirin. Look, it hasn't even developed spiritual intelligence. It can't understand Your Majesty's words. He actually said that it hadn't developed spiritual intelligence. Kirin suddenly raised its head. Its round cat eyes stared at the blind official. It sneered and finally said, "You're the one who hasn't developed spiritual intelligence. Your whole family hasn't gained sentience." After spending a long time with Ning Xuema, it had unconsciously learned many of her speech patterns. Its voice was crisp and clear, like that of a 7 or 8-year-old child, clear and bright with a hint of majesty. As soon as it spoke, even though everyone was mentally prepared, they were still shocked. Everyone turned to look at Kirin. The minister was not angry at being scolded by it. He looked at it and said deliberately, "Just because you can talk doesn't mean you are a Kirin beast. There are cat demons in this world." After all, Kirin was still young and could not stand being provoked. It immediately jumped up and said, "You are the cat demon. Your whole family are cat demons." The minister's entire family was dragged into the conversation. The surrounding ministers could not hold back their laughter, causing the minister to feel slightly embarrassed. He sneered and said, "You say you're not a cat demon. What proof do you have?" Kirin looked at him with disdain. "You are indeed a mortal with the naked eye. You can't tell the difference between a demon and a god. I have auspicious celestial aura on me, not some demon aura." Then, "Kirin, how about you show us your auspicious celestial aura?" Lan Yufeng, the Chancellor of the Supreme Court, said with a smile. The little Qilin glanced at him. Lan Yufeng's appearance was handsome and refined, which was quite to its liking. It also heard that he was more polite, which made its heart feel more comfortable. Finally, it lazily stood up from the armchair and stretched. "What's so difficult about that? Today I will show you my true form." Chapter 340. It jumped lightly onto the ground, and a blue light flashed like a wave. The little blue cat disappeared, and a majestic Kirin appeared in its place. It was about the size of half a horse, and its scales were sparkling under the sunlight. The 2 horns on its head were like dragon horns, and they looked like they were carved from green jade. Its eyes were beautiful almond-shaped, and its eyeballs were dark blue, like crystal-clear sapphires, shining with a glass-like luster. Its 2 whiskers trembled beside its lips, making it look even cuter. Its body seemed to be surrounded by a light blue luster, and with its movements, there seemed to be steam rising from it. It made people unable to look away. Although everyone had heard of Kirin beasts, this was the first time they had seen it in real life. Now that they saw it, their hearts were naturally shocked. Even Lu Hinti couldn't help but size it up. A strange light flashed in his eyes. This little Qilin was found in the territory of the vast Sky Empire, so it should belong to the imperial family. "Kirin, do you have a name?" Lu Hinti asked in a gentle voice, but secretly made a gesture to the guard beside him, indicating for him to find a few beast tamers. "Yes, my name is Little Apple." Kirin held its head high and chest out. Lu Hinti frowned. "This name is not mighty enough. How about I give you another name?" As long as it accepted his name, it meant that it had accepted the royal family's offer. Kirin was stunned, and its eyes suddenly widened. "This name was given to me by my mother. I don't want any other name." It actually had a mother? Didn't that mean that there were other Kirin beasts? If they caught other Kirin beasts, it would definitely shake the entire continent. Maybe the other 4 countries would immediately bow down to them. "Since it's like this, I won't help you change your name. Little Apple, where is your home?" Lu Hinti's voice was even more amiable. My home is in the Kirin Holy Land. Kirin was still young, and it didn't know how sinister people could be, and it didn't know the twists and turns of people's hearts. When others asked, it spilled the beans. Qilin Holy Land? Lu Hin-ti and the other ministers looked at each other. This was the first time they had heard of this place. I wonder how many Qilins there are in this place. Your family must be quite big, right? Lu Hin-ti asked patiently. Of course, Kirin is a big family. There are several thousand of them. Kirin was proud, but a hint of sadness flashed through his eyes. It was a little homesick. Although the other Qilins in the family didn't treat it well, that place was its hometown after all. There were actually several thousand Qilins. Everyone's eyes lit up. Little Apple, do you miss home? If there's a chance, I'll send someone to send you home. Okay? Lu Hin-ti didn't want to directly ask Kirin where the Holy Land of Kirin was. He was afraid that it would arouse the little guy's suspicion, so he asked in a roundabout way. As long as the little fellow agreed, would he be afraid that he wouldn't be able to find the Qilin Holy Land if he followed it? No need. Kirin turned back into a blue cat and nestled in the armchair. It looked lazy. I'll bring Master back in the future. It was almost like it was chased out. Even if it wanted to go back, it would have to wait until it was strong enough. It would be considered returning home in glory, and it didn't want to go back with its tail between its legs. The ministers looked at each other. It seemed that this Kirin wasn't so easy to deal with. At this time, everyone could see that Kirin's intelligence was equivalent to that of an 8 or 9-year-old child. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.